You're still breathing? Disgusting. That was my little sister, holding a knife to my throat. Welcome home. Let me set the scene, because I'd only just arrived in it myself. 10 minutes before the knife, I was a normal guy from Earth. Then I opened my eyes in a rattling carriage, wearing a stranger's bruises, while a stranger's memories poured into my skull like someone upending a bucket of misery over my head. The body's original owner was named Corbin, illegitimate son of Marquis Valerius Thorn, which sounds fancy right up until you learn what illegitimate buys you in a noble house. It buys you a childhood of beatings, a butler who smiles while he starves you, and a legitimate family that treats your continued existence as a filing error. The previous tenant's soul was gone, dissolved. All that stayed behind was the lease, the damage, and a list of everyone responsible. And in the back of my aching new head, something went beep. Boot sequence complete. Ayla online. 91% of functions lost. Connection to Tiangong, none. Master, your body registers 3 cracked ribs, malnutrition, and an unhealed history of blunt trauma. Recommendation: better life choices. Oh, right, I'd brought luggage. In my old life, I was a researcher, and Ayla was our lab's crown jewel, a semi-intelligent assistant chip. She'd survived the trip between worlds the way I survive family reunions, barely, and missing most of the good parts. No weapon systems, no library of forbidden super science. What she had left was storage of mental energy, a calculation speed that could embarrass a cathedral full of accountants, and an inexhaustible supply of judgment, mostly the judgment. Her first full scan of my new body cost so much mental energy I blacked out on the carriage floor and woke up a day later with a headache like a war crime. That was lesson 1 about my new life. Even my superpowers billed me. The carriage was taking me home, to the shining fortress, seat of House Thorn. The honor guard that met me at the gates was led by Malachi, the family butler, who greeted me with a warmth so counterfeit you could bend it with your teeth. The previous Corbin's memories helpfully annotated the smile. This was the man who'd choreographed every one of his childhood beatings while keeping his own gloves clean. Hello, Malachi. Filing you under later. And then came Seraphina, my legitimate little sister, who had the face of an angel and the personality of a tax audit with a grudge. She greeted her long-absent brother by kicking me across the entrance hall, that was the ribs, and following me down with a knife. And I genuinely believe the only reason my story didn't end in that hallway is that Malachi caught her wrist. Not, "Stop, that's your brother." Not, "This is wrong." What he actually said was, "The master says not yet." Not yet. Like I was a roast that needed more time in the oven. I lay on those beautiful marble tiles, bleeding on the grout, and did the only sensible thing a man can do in that position. I started planning my exit. The oven timer went off the next morning. My father summoned me to his study. Valerius Thorn, tall, composed, cold eyes, all the emotional warmth of a marble countertop. He didn't ask about my health. He informed me, informed, the way you inform furniture it's being moved, that I was to be assigned a magic mentor. Wonderful news! Except the mentor's name was Barnaby, and the previous owner's memories came with footnotes. Barnaby was a bloodline apothecary. He didn't teach students, he processed them. His last several apprentices had exited the mentorship as ingredients. My father wasn't giving me a teacher. He was giving me an expiration date and calling it an education. I stood in that study, watched him sign papers without looking at me, and did the math in half a second, because the alternative to math was dying. There existed exactly one legal door out of this house that even a marquis couldn't casually slam: the Pioneer Knight program. The Kingdom of Terra wanted brave idiots to sail into the Sea of Myriad Islands, a 1,000-island wilderness of pirates, monsters, and worse, plant a flag, and call it expanding the realm. The deal was written in blood-red ink. Carve out 100 square kilometers, gather 5,000 subjects, hold it all for 3 years, and the crown makes you a real, landed, hereditary noble. Fail, and you're demoted to property. The statistics were the best part. About 140 knights sailed every year. About 120 didn't come back. Those were the official numbers, which meant the real ones were worse. So I pitched it. I stood in front of the man who'd just scheduled my dissection, and I performed the role of ambitious young bastard like my life depended on it, because it did. I invented a mentor in the city who'd already agreed to sponsor me, a mage named Isolde, who to this day does not know she saved my life by not existing. I invoked family glory. I asked for nothing but a signature and the family's blessing to go die somewhere profitable. Valerius stared at me for a long, long moment. Cold eyes, unreadable. And then he said something I'd chew on for 6 years. You survived this long because I kept you here. Remember that when you're out there. Thanks for the participation trophy, Dad, he signed. Congratulations to me. I'd escaped the frying pan by volunteering for a fire with a 90% mortality rate. In this economy, that's called upward mobility. I left the Shining Fortress with everything I owned, which was one trunk and one human being. Old Kenji, a white-haired servant with a spine of bent iron, the only person in that castle who'd ever fed the previous Corbin without being ordered to. As the gates closed behind us, Malachi bowed his perfect butler bow and smiled his perfect butler smile. I smiled back. One of us meant it as a goodbye. Highland City hit me like a carnival built on a cash register. The biggest port in the kingdom, forests of masts, streets of shouting merchants, the smell of tar and spice and ambition. Also, my first live demonstration of how power actually worked here. In the city hall, while I queued to register, a young noble had an official pinned to the wall by the throat, explaining, in the pleasant tone you'd use to discuss weather, precisely how replaceable the man was. Nobody intervened. Several people took notes. "Who is that?" I asked the clerk. "Young Master Darian Volkov," the clerk whispered, in the exact voice you'd use for an incoming tide. The Volkov family, I learned, were the earls who effectively owned Highland City. The young master was their heir. I made a mental note to never, ever appear on that man's radar. Comedy takes time to set up. Give it a few months. The registration itself took an hour. I walked out a certified pioneer knight with a 3-month preparation window and a military-grade map of the Sea of Myriad Islands, which came with a free lecture from a board officer. 3 powers ruled the islands, he said. The Noble Council, lords who'd made it. The Pirate Alliance, lords who'd made it without paperwork. And the sea demons in the far deep water, who were exactly as friendly as the name implied. Between those 3, 1,000 islands of freelance violence. "Questions?" said the officer. "Yes. What do the survivors have in common?" He thought about it. "Money," he said. "Lots of money. Early. Finally, useful intelligence. Ayla, honest odds. Beep, survival probability with current assets, 4%. Recommendation, acquire gold, large amounts, immediately. This is why we get along. No inspirational speeches, no destiny, just get rich or die. And getting rich, as it happened, was the one thing I was actually qualified for. Because in my old world, I'd been a chemist. In this world, potion brewing was a profession that printed money and answered to no supply chain but talent. And Ayla had a party trick that broke the entire industry over its knee. Here's the thing about apothecaries in this world. They fail, constantly. Even acknowledged masters ruin a third of their batches, because the final stage of any potion is injecting your mental energy into the mixture in a perfectly steady stream, and human minds don't do perfectly steady. It's an art. Artists have bad days. Ayla doesn't have days. She could store my mental energy in advance and release it with machine precision, no tremor, no fatigue, no artistic temperament. Every apothecary on this continent was throwing darts blindfolded and calling 40% a career. I had walked into the casino with a printer, through an agent named Marcus, a cheerful cockroach of a man who could procure anything in Highland for a fee, including, I'd later learn, certificates for qualifications you did not technically possess. I rented a shabby house on the city's edge, 25 gold for the year, and built a lab in the basement. Then reality charged a setup fee. My first potion boiled into sludge. The second one ate through the flask. The third produced a smell that old Kenji upstairs described as the devil's laundry. And I wanted on record that knowing the theory of a thing and doing it with a brand new soul in a brand new body are 2 different sports. Ayla, diagnostics. Master's mental output varies by 11%. A steady 4% is required. In human terms, your hands are drunk. Can you drive? I thought you'd never ask. 4th attempt. Ayla took over the injection, feeding my stored energy into the mix with inhuman steadiness. The bubbling liquid settled, cleared, and turned a perfect glowing amber. Level 1 recovery potion. Flawless. Market value. More than a laborer's month. I stood in my mildewed basement, holding my first bottle of liquid rent money, and started laughing like a villain, which in hindsight was foreshadowing. Day 2. Level 2 potions. First try. By the end of the week, level 3, 2 varieties, fire rhythm for warriors, mental agility for mages, both perfect, both repeatable, both worth their weight in someone else's tears. Ayla, income projection. At safe sales volume, 42 gold per day. Master, please stop dancing. It is undignified and it skews my sensors. 42 gold a day, in a city where 2 gold a month fed a family. And the sales weren't even the real play. The real play was drinking my own supply. Cultivation in this world was brutally slow. At my natural pace, reaching rank 5 as a mage, the bare minimum for a man planning to argue with pirates would take nearly 600 days. I had 90. But cultivation speed, like everything else here, was for sale. With a steady diet of my own mental agility potions, Ayla's projection dropped from 600 days to 76. The universe had finally dealt me a decent hand. I intended to count cards, palm aces, and tip the dealer just enough to keep her quiet. Ayla, draft the plan. 3 months. Every coin, every bottle, every day. Beep, plan drafted. Phase 1 is titled, Stop Being Weak. That's not a phase, that's a lifestyle. Noted, renaming lifestyle. Phase 1 ran on a simple loop. Brew, sell, drink, cultivate, hide. The hiding was the delicate part. 100% success rate isn't a talent, it's a headline. And headlines out here get you kidnapped by people with nicer basements than yours. So I sold through the Apothecary Guild in careful, boring amounts, and I ran a 40% success rate as my public face, deliberately spacing out my sales, occasionally complaining about ruined batches to the guild clerk with the heartbroken face of a man who'd just burned money. The clerk, a shrewd old fox named Ren Tao, clucked sympathetically, paid me 140 gold for my first 14 bottles, and sold me materials at almost fair prices. I also went shopping for the future. Bell Street, the labor market. The Shadow Merchant Guild's steward Finn walked me down rows of human beings with prices chalked beside them. A strong worker's contract, I learned, cost 25 gold, more than I could spare, yet. And this world's economy ran on bought people the way mine had run on oil. I kept my face still, my coin pocketed, and my notes long. When I could afford people, I'd buy the ones nobody else valued. And then I'd see whether freeing a person bought something loyalty brokers couldn't price. Not sentiment, strategy, mostly strategy. Look, we'll get there. A month in, the loop hit its first snag. I had 88 potions in the basement I couldn't sell because my fictional 40% success rate could only justify so much inventory, and I still needed 2,800 more gold for the expedition kit. Ayla's solution was elegant. Stop selling more bottles, start selling better ones. Intermediate potions, level 4. The kind only certified masters brewed reliably, the kind that made guild clerks stop asking questions about volume because the margins answered everything. Level 4 also nearly broke me. Half a month of failures, 20 sets of materials, 20, burned into stinking residue, while Ayla recalibrated for the finer energy weave, me sleeping in the lab, unwashed for 5 days, eyes like a haunted raccoon. Old Kenji started leaving food at the top of the stairs like he was feeding a ghost. On attempt 21, the flask cleared into a deep, luminous blue. Level 4 mental agility potion. The kind of bottle mid-tier nobles bribe each other with. I slept for 11 hours, washed off my raccoon phase, and walked into the guild like a man reborn. Ren Tao took one look at the bottle, and his eyebrows attempted to leave his face. What I didn't know, Ren Tao had a second employer for exactly this kind of eyebrow event. Within the hour, my name, my address, my sales history, and my suspiciously flawless intermediate potion were all sitting on the desk of the last man in Highland I wanted to know I existed. Darian Volkov read the report on the strange new apothecary twice, and then I have this from him directly, years later, over wine. He said, "Interesting, let him ripen," and went back to his succession war. Let him ripen. I was being farmed and didn't even know it. The harvest invitation arrived a week later, hand-delivered by a butler named Bertram, whose politeness had edges. Young Master Darian requests the pleasure of your company at dinner. You don't decline the Orokos in Highland. You choose between arriving on foot or being delivered. I walked into the Volkov manor rehearsing lies and counting exits. The place was wealth as architecture, door handles worth more than my house, a dining hall you could hold cavalry maneuvers in. And at the head of the table, the young man from City Hall, the official throttler himself, now wearing the expression of a genial host, pouring my wine with his own hands. Corbin, Pioneer Knight, apothecary of, officially, modest success. He smiled. Officially. Guild records are public, I said carefully. Modest is what they say. Guild records say you fail 6 batches in 10. He set down the bottle. Yet your materials purchases, which are also traceable if one owns the merchants, and I do, say you fail almost none. So either you eat the extra potions, which would have killed you months ago, or you're the most interesting man to walk into my city in years. Every exit I'd counted got shorter. I put my hands on the table, ready to spin the next lie, and he waved it away before it was born. Relax. If I wanted to squeeze you, we'd be having this conversation in a cellar, and I wouldn't have decanted the good wine. He leaned back. Do you know the story of St. Paul and the merchant Malazar? No? A nobody merchant once fed a starving young alchemist for a winter. The alchemist became a grand master. For the rest of that century, no one in 3 kingdoms dared touch House Malazar. My family got rich on old stories like that, Corbin. I'm offering to buy one while it's cheap. Then he slid a paper across the table, and I nearly choked on wine that cost more than my lab. The list. 100 workers for my future territory. 14.5 tons of food. 300 tools of every trade. A squad of trained guards under contract, and 1 year of protection purchased from the Black Knight pirate group, the 3rd strongest pirate armada on the entire sea, meaning that for my first, most fragile year, the local food chain would be legally required to not eat me. A gift basket worth more than everything I owned, multiplied by 10. And what do you want? I asked, because nobody feeds a stray this well without wanting the stray for something. Exclusive trade, your materials at cost through my channels, your potions at market through my channels, and your friendship, he raised his glass, for later, when you're worth more. I want to be clear about my thought process. I trusted him about as far as I could throw his manner. But when a man hands you a life raft, you don't refuse it because you're suspicious of his boat. We signed that night. Neither of us said out loud that it was the beginning of the single most profitable friendship of my 2 lives, because neither of us knew, and because if you'd told us, we'd both have tried to renegotiate the terms. With the Volkov contract in my pocket, the last 3 months of prep turned into a montage of assembling a survival kit. Item 1. Power. 76 days after my first potion, right on Ayla's schedule, I broke through to rank 5 mage. In the basement, alone, with fire elements swirling around me like celebratory confetti, and my chip's voice supplying the fanfare. Beep, milestone reached. You are now approximately dangerous. Item 2. Muscle. Marcus the agent shortlisted 3 mercenary companies for me. 2 had better weapons and worse rumors. The 3rd was the Loyal Lion Mercenary Corps. Captain, one McLeod, a scarred bear of a man with a handshake like a hydraulic accident, whose reputation was 1 sentence long. Never once sold out a client. I interviewed him with exactly 1 real question buried in the small talk. If it comes down to protecting my goods or my life, which do you? Life, he said before I finished. Cargo can be reimbursed, employers can't. Then he added, frowning like it mattered more than the money, it's in our charter. It's in our charter. I hired the whole company on the spot, 1,000 gold a year, and inspected their base at Jamosa Town mostly as a formality. You can buy muscle anywhere. Spine has a waiting list. Item 3. Intelligence about my future neighbors, which arrived wearing a black coat and a captain's arrogance. At our second meeting, Darian spread a nautical map and introduced me, on paper, to Victoria Draven, called the Black Rose, daughter of the Black Knight Pirate Group's commander, and the person who'd be administering my protection contract. Then he tapped the far western edge of the map, an unnamed speck of an island pressed right up against the border with the Orc Empire, and said the single word that launched everything. Here. That's the wrong direction, I said. Everything valuable is east. That thing is a rock at the end of the world. Why, trust me. The smile of a man who knows something. Or don't. But take the island. I ran it past Ayla, who found no strategic value whatsoever, which itself was interesting. Darian Volkov did not deal in worthless things. I took the island. Item 4 wasn't on any list. At a noble auction Darian dragged me to for networking, between the jewelry lots and the artifact lots, they brought out a person. An elf woman, war captive, a lifetime contract priced by the pound, standing on the block with eyes that had already left the room, the year, the world. I'd absorbed a lot of this world's ugliness by then, filed it all under later, when I'm strong. That one refused to be filed. I didn't say anything. Apparently my face said it for me, because Darian, watching me instead of the lot, raised his hand, bought out her contract at 5,000 gold like he was buying stationery, and handed me the papers. Consider it a housewarming gift. Every lord needs staff who can read. That night, at my rented house, I put the contract papers in her hands and told her to tear them up. She stared at me, this woman who'd been priced by the pound that same afternoon, holding her own life and clearly not trusting the weight of it. "There's a catch," she said finally, her first words to me. "There's no catch. There's a door. Old Kenji will give you traveling money." She tore the papers, very slowly, watching me the whole time for the trick. Then she informed me, informed, past tense of choice, that a freed elf with no coin, no papers, and no country would be recaptured or dead within the week. So she would be staying on as my aide. I could consider it her decision rather than my charity. And dinner would be at sunset because my current schedule was, quote, the schedule of a corpse that hasn't been told yet. That was Lyra. She never once let me finish being noble without correcting the paperwork. Departure day. 3 merchant ships riding low. 100 workers whose contracts I'd bought and quietly converted to wages. McLeod's loyal lions on the rails. Overseer Gareth, Captain Julian, Guard Captain Kalen, all 3 seconded from Darian's organization. All 3, I assumed, reporting home. Fine, let them report. Old Kenji at the bow, Lyra already reorganizing the manifests. And below decks, my strangest investment, 12 orphaned kids bought out of Finn's grimmest listings for pennies, every one of them a tested mage, tested inferior grade, worthless, unteachable, the kind of talent the market threw back. I had a chip that compensated for inferior talent the way she compensated for mine. Worthless kids and a worthless bastard sailing west to a worthless island. The market was about to take a bath. We stopped once en route at White Whale Island, the Black Knight's great trading post, to pay respects to our new protectors. The respects got paid in an unexpected currency. A wall of muscle with a scar across his face, Cutter Caleb, Victoria's personal guard, took exception to McLeod's posture, or existence, and flattened him. 1 punch. My captain, the hydraulic handshake himself, horizontal on the dock in front of my entire expedition. Message received. Out here, we were plankton with a receipt. Victoria herself appeared for the apology, which she performed with her mouth while her eyes did inventory on me. Gorgeous, arrogant, 20 years old, and wearing command like an old coat. The apology pivoted within 4 sentences into a recruitment pitch. Why serve Darian Volkop's interests when the Black Knight pirate group offered so much more? I gave her a tragic look and my very best lie. Darian had leverage on me. Terrible leverage. Couldn't discuss it. She studied me, decided I was too pathetic to be lying, and lost interest, and just like that, I was officially a man both powers thought they owned. Which, if you're keeping score, is the single safest thing a weak man can be while he stops being weak. And then the ships turned west, the sea emptied out, and one gray morning, there it was on the horizon. 12 square kilometers of nothing. A hill on the west end, a plain on the east, a freshwater stream stitched down the middle. No buildings, no roads, no name. Mine. Every worthless inch of it. I stood at the bow next to old Kenji while the landing boats went out, and the old man, who had watched the previous Corbin grow up in a marble house that hated him, looked at the empty rock like it was a cathedral. Ayla, log the date, day 1 of the Empire. Beep, logged. Filed under optimistic. We named it Enlightenment Island because I was feeling poetic, and nobody outranked me enough to object. The first month was carpentry and cold sweat. Survey first, Kalen's guards swept the whole island and found no demonic beasts in residence, which was the real estate equivalent of winning a small lottery. Then, houses went up in rows, a dock crawled out into the bay plank by plank, fields got cleared on the eastern plain. I chose the lab site before I chose my own bedroom, which tells you everything about my priorities and most of what's wrong with me. The ledger, meanwhile, turned a color I didn't like. Income, 600 gold a month. Expenses, 1,500. 100 mouths, a mercenary payroll, and an island with zero infrastructure eat money the way the sea eats sandcastles. Ayla, time to insolvency? Beep, 11 weeks. Recommendation, brew faster, spend never. The farm math was its own comedy. Our fields, fully planted and blessed with good weather, would yield maybe 180 tons of grain a year. That sounds impressive until you price it. An entire year of 100 people's backbreaking agriculture earned less than my basement did in a good week. The island was never going to be a farm. The island was a lab with a beach, and everything else, fields, dock, guard posts, the lot, existed to keep the lab breathing. Darian's first aid convoy arrived like a rich uncle at a funeral. 50 tons of grain, wrought iron, and 3 specialist craftsmen, Martin, Silas, Anthony, on loan. Attached, a letter offering a 3,000 gold interest-free loan, phrased so warmly you could almost miss that it was a leash with a bow on it. I took the loan. When someone offers you a velvet leash and the alternative is starving, you wear the leash, you say thank you, and you remember whose hand is on the other end. Then the island reminded me why the mortality rate was 90%. They came out of the surf at dawn. War armor crabs, each the size of a cart, plated like siege engines, claws that sheared spears like breadsticks. Not a few, a colony. And at the back, tall as a house and wreathed in water magic, a crab king, conducting the tide of its children up my beach. The alarm bell hadn't finished its first swing before McLeod turned into a different person. A month of polite contractor vanished. What replaced it was a butcher shop general. Shield wall here, spears in rotation, wounded back, you plug that gap. Kalen, all young fire, charged when he should have held and nearly got his squad clipped off the line. McLeod's roar physically relocated him. Noted for later, brave, fast, needs a leash. And me? I stood on a rooftop with 3 months of potion-fueled cultivation in my veins and found out what a rank 5 mage with a chip-perfected chain fireball does to a crab king. The answer? 1 cast, 1 very large seafood dinner. The fireball leapt, split, and hammered the king's skull in a chain of white-orange blasts, and when the steam cleared, the tide of crabs was just confused animals being butchered by professionals. We lost 20 people that morning, 20 of my first 100. I paid the death benefits at Highland City rates, real pensions, to families of contract workers, and McLeod watched me sign the ledger with an unreadable look. Out here, lords don't pay pensions for workers, he said. Out here, lords lose workers and wonder why, I said. My people cost money to replace. Loyalty is cheaper than recruitment. It's just math. Math, he repeated, filing something away behind the scar. The something would come due later, at sunset, and change both our lives. Give it a season. The 12 kids started magic lessons that same week in a shed with a leaky roof, and I want to talk about them because everyone else never had. Inferior mage talent, the appraisers had ruled. Slow to gather elements, slow to form models, not worth a real teacher's hour. And they were slow, that part was true. But slow is a speed, not a wall, and speed is exactly the thing a lord who manufactures cultivation potions can buy in bulk. Lyra ran their drills with the patience of a tree and the standards of a drill sergeant. Ayla built each child a personalized training model that squeezed every drop from their narrow channels. I supplied the potions at a rate that would have bankrupted a baron. 2 months later, a sharp-eyed boy named Reese stood in front of the class and cast his first true spell, a wobbly, beautiful little firebolt, and 7 of his cohort followed within the week. 8 real mages, conjured out of worthless. I freed every one of them on the spot the day they cast. And then I did something slightly evil. I made a public fuss over Reese specifically. Extra materials, extra praise, first pick of everything. Jealousy is fuel. The remaining 4 trained like their hair was on fire, and the 8 worked twice as hard to keep their new perch. Lyra watched my little jealousy engine run and said, dry as paper, "You'd have made a wonderful stepmother." Spring brought 150 new settlers, refugees, debtors, contract workers, every one of whose papers I converted to wages on arrival, and, less pleasantly, an audience. Julian came back from a supply run certain his convoy had been shadowed. Somebody with boats was doing arithmetic about us. The somebody had a name. Eric Mueller, Lord of Huangshi Island, vassal of the Blackwood family, one of the 2 overlord powers of our sea, and a man whose business model was visiting new settlements the way Frost visits orchards. He came at night, of course. Boats full of raiders, oars muffled, aimed at a colony of sleeping farmers. 2 problems. 1. Old Kenji barely slept, and his old eyes read the water better than most men read print. 2. By the time Mueller's keels touched my sand, my sleeping farmers were 40 loyal lions in ambush positions and 1 mage on a cold rooftop with a full tank. What was supposed to be a massacre became a harvest. Shield walls closed off the beach, fire fell out of the dark, and halfway through, when the outcome was arithmetic, I did the thing that scandalized every professional soldier present. I started auctioning kill bounties. Out loud. Mid-battle. Like a fish market. 50 gold for the officer with the axe. 80 for the big one by the boats. 100 if you take the helmsman alive. My mercenaries went from disciplined to enthusiastic in a way I can only describe as financially motivated. McLeod told me afterward that in 20 years of contracts, he'd never heard a battlefield sound like a stock exchange. He said it disapprovingly. He was also grinning. Mueller's lieutenant, a thug named Rourke, got his sword hand ruined and his person captured. Mueller himself swam for it, minus most of his men. And then came my favorite part of any war, the paperwork. By the time the settlement negotiations were over, being raided by Eric Mueller had netted me 1,000 gold in reparations, 150 workers, and 15 tons of grain, delivered to my dock by Mueller's own sullen sailors, while their lord glared mortal enemy vows from his deck. I waved. He didn't wave back. Rude. The rest of the year, the island found its rhythm. McLeod drilled the fittest workers into a real territory guard. I promoted old Kenji to head of the household and started paying everyone Highland rate wages, which cost a fortune, and bought something no fortune buys directly, a settlement where people had moved from surviving to planning. And on the western hillside, I planted the investment that made my accountant Zahir stop sleeping, magic herb fields. My own raw materials, cutting potion costs nearly in half, eventually. Magic herbs grow at the speed of bureaucracy. I hit level 6 that winter, and then the local wildlife tried to rob me and accidentally became my cavalry. Green turtles. Armored like vault doors, cranky as landlords, jaws that could crush a shield, and, this is the load-bearing fact, smart enough to bribe. A herd of them raided my precious herb fields at night, and we tracked the culprits to a sea cave on the north shore, where everyone else saw a monster problem. I saw a procurement opportunity. Green turtles crave magic crystals the way I crave not dying. So instead of a punitive expedition, I sent negotiators with boxes of crystals, and after 2 weeks of the strangest diplomacy of my life, you have not lived until you've watched a mercenary captain formally exchange gifts with a turtle. 13 of the beasts accepted saddles, riders, and a crystal salary. Cavalry that swims. Armored beasts that charge on land and dive under a harbor chain. The military theorists of this world hated this one weird trick, and they were going to hate it so much more. And then, one evening at sunset, McLeod found me on the half-built dock, fidgeting like a schoolboy outside a headmaster's door. It took him 10 minutes of talking about weather and rope prices to get to it. "The contract," he finally said. "I want out." My stomach dropped through the planks. Out? Out of the contract. He stared at the horizon, ears going red. Contracts end. I've watched you pay pensions nobody made you pay, and free everyone the law said you owned. And I've decided. He turned and went down on one knee, this enormous, scarred slab of a man, on my dock. The loyal lions are done being rented. Take the oath, my lord. Us, dissolved. Yours. Permanently. I'd love to tell you I answered with something worthy of the moment. What I actually said, after a stunned silence, was, "Salaries stay the same." What he apparently heard was poetry, because the man's eyes went wet while he swore the oath, and behind him, unplanned, half the company knelt on the boards like a field of iron wheat. That was the day the island stopped being a business with guards and became a territory with an army. Small army, growing appetite. September brought raid month, and with it, finally, the answer to the question that had been itching me for a year. Why did Darian Volkov, who dealt in nothing worthless, hand me a worthless island? Raid month, officially, the annual patriotic festival when the kingdom's North Sea fleet lifts its blockade of the Orc Empire, and every noble with a boat sails off to raid the Orc coast for glory, plunder, and war merit. Raid month, actually, the biggest smuggling window on the continent, when the eastern coastal aristocracy, under all that flag-waving cover, trades with the very orcs everyone's pretending to fight. Darian arrived for it with 12 ships riding suspiciously low in the water, and the smile of a man about to explain something illegal to a friend he's certain will say yes. "Your island," he said, spreading a chart on my table, "sits a day's sail from the Yugu clan's coast. Foxkin, merchants, my family's quiet partners for 3 generations. Every crystal, every magic core, every beast the orc lands produce, and no customs office in the world." He tapped my bay. "And now the route has a warehouse. Legally yours, deniably mine." I'd been recruited as a friend and invested in as a storage unit. Honestly, respect. I'd have done the same to me. That night, I met Elder Hiroko of the Yugu clan, a foxwoman with centuries banked behind her eyes and compound interest in her smile, and stood in my own warehouse watching crystals worth 370,000 gold change hands by lantern light. My cut was 7,000. Darian deducted the 3,000 gold loan on the spot with the cheerful ruthlessness of a man who has never once forgotten a decimal in his life. You could have waived it, I said, as a gesture. I could have, he agreed, counting, but then you'd owe me a favor instead of gold, and favors compound worse. I'm protecting you. From what? From me. He grinned and handed over my 4,000. Somewhere in that exchange, I've never been able to locate the exact sentence, we stopped being investor and asset and became something my ledger had no column for. I also bought 50 orc heads that month. Not my kills, trophies purchased from someone else's raid, because war merit is tallied by the head, and a certain apothecary who never left his island needed a war record. Come spring, Gareth, Kalen, and Julian took formal oaths as my men. Darian released their contracts with a wave, and we threw a victory banquet celebrating my heroic raid month exploits, at which I gave a modest speech about battles I had never seen. The Human Alliance issued me a genuine merit certificate for imaginary valor. I framed it. Some lies deserve nice frames. Year 1 closed with a shipyard under construction, a Dawn Day festival for the whole settlement, my potion line expanding into warrior physique brews, and one cloud on the horizon of my ledger, no bigger than a man's hand. Grain prices, everywhere, had begun, very quietly, to climb. Year 2 opened with the sea's two biggest sharks biting each other, and the water got interesting. The Black Knight pirate group and the Blackwood family, our region's twin overlords, Pirate King and Merchant King, tipped from cold rivalry into open war. Ultimatums flew, vassals scrambled for sides, and every mid-sized predator in the sea suddenly had much bigger problems than watching their little neighbors, which meant that a certain lord named Eric Mueller, Blackwood vassal, night raider, sworn mortal enemy of mine, was standing all alone, with nobody left to hide behind. I'd been keeping his file warm for exactly this weather. I rented 100 extra guards through a cheerfully mercenary young noble named Liam Caldwell, a man who'd rent you his grandmother if you insured her, loaded the loyal lions and my turtle riders onto boats, and paid Huangshi Island a return visit. Mueller had come to me in the dark, aiming for sleeping farmers. I came to him at dawn, with mages announced by horns. Let the record show the difference. His walls lasted an hour. Rourke, the lieutenant who'd led the landing on my beach, patched up and back in service, didn't survive the assault. MacLeod saw to it personally and reported it with the satisfaction of a man closing an old wound. Mueller himself was dragged out of his own cellar, tried in his own courtyard by the shortest tribunal in maritime history, me, reading his crimes off a very short scroll, and executed in front of his own men. Out here, the only apology that counts is the kind you can't take back. The expedition books, 20,000+ gold, 520 workers freed from his pens and signed to my wages, a stack of ships, and a warrior breathing technique manual from his study. Revenge that pays dividends is my favorite genre of revenge, and since we were already at sea, the Overlord's War kept handing me gifts. 2 other Blackwood vassals, Lords Clarence and Tobin, had jumped on the Bloodhand pirates at Big Fish Island and gotten bogged down besieging the fortress. Their combined invasion fleet sat at the captured dock, crews ashore, guarded like a bicycle outside a tavern. So I stole it. All of it. Every ship in one night sailed off by prize crews while my turtle riders cut the harbor watch off from the alarm bell. And then, this is the part I'm proudest of, I blockaded the island with their own fleet, leaving 2 armies victorious, triumphant, and marooned. 2 days later, I received Lords Clarence and Tobin aboard my flagship, served decent wine, and sold them their own warships back at 460 gold a hull. Tobin turned a color I'd previously only seen on eggplants. Clarence, to his eternal credit, started laughing somewhere around the 3rd invoice line and couldn't stop. We parted, technically, as allies. They even signed an intelligence sharing pact with me, mostly out of respect for the sheer nerve of it. The Bloodhand pirates hadn't survived their own siege, which left Big Fish Island ownerless. 40 square kilometers, a real shipyard, stone buildings, a harbor worth the name. I moved my flag there before the smoke finished clearing. Enlightenment Island had been the cradle. Big Fish was the first real castle. Population across my little realm, 1,700 and climbing. Success, of course, has a tax collector. Mine arrived on a black warship that rammed my brand new dock hard enough to crack pilings. I checked later. She'd done it on purpose, for the entrance, and sauntered down the gangplank with a smile worth exactly 6,000 gold. Protection fees have gone up, Victoria announced, boots on my planking, hand on her hip. You've gotten more valuable. Congratulations. You broke my dock. Add it to the invoice. She toured my warehouse uninvited, priced everything in it with her eyes, tried to recruit me away from Darien for the third time, got the same tragic performance about leverage, seemed almost disappointed it still worked, and sailed off with my 6,000 gold and the self-satisfaction of a cat that ate someone else's canary. Ayla, file under enemies? Beep, filed under unresolved. That's not a category. It is now, master. The island itself kept feeding us. That summer, the eel-scale fish migration came through our waters, silver rivers of magic fish whose meat strengthens the body, and I declared a territory-wide fishing festival, nets out, bonfires up, the works. Result? A season of full bellies and 11 brand new professionals popping up among my own people like mushrooms after rain, workers whose bodies finally crossed the warrior threshold. Cheapest army building program ever devised, dinner. Then a wild green turtle herd wandered into our bay, 42 head, led by a rank 5 monster with a shell like a fortress gate. My existing turtles waddled out as ambassadors, the crystal budget wept, and after a week of interspecies diplomacy, I had 38 riders in my swimming cavalry and a herd breeding program. Zahir, my accountant, presented the cost sheet at the next council with the expression of a man reading his own obituary. Worth it. Siege beasts that swim do not go on sale. Money stayed the villain of the season anyway. Armies eat gold faster than cauldrons brew it, and by July, I hit my second real financial crisis, 3,000 gold short with wages due. The fix was quiet. Julian ran an emergency sale of my potion material stockpile through third ports. Somewhere in arranging it, he worked out the real arithmetic of my basement. No 40% apothecary buys materials in those volumes, and said nothing to anyone, including me. I only learned he knew a year later by accident. Men like that you promote, pay past the market, and never, ever let leave. Then one evening, Darien arrived unannounced. No wine, no jokes. He walked into my study, closed the door himself, and told me the world was about to end on schedule. The Hall of Mages ran the star charts twice, he said. 3 years of continental drought, starting next harvest. I did merchant math first, because I am what I am. Grain up, potion steady, buy warehouses. Darien watched me calculate and shook his head slowly, like a tutor with a slow student. Farther, Corbin, drought means famine. Famine means desperation. The orc lands dry out first and hardest. Their plains die in year 1. 4 million orc warriors do not quietly starve. He let it sit. They march. It's not a market event. It's a war clock. And then he told me why he'd really come. His father was aging. The succession fight with his brother Cassian was going badly. I'll introduce Cassian properly later. He deserves his own paragraph, preferably one with a trapdoor in it. And Darien needed weight. War merit. The real, bloody kind that elder councils can't argue with. Help me get it, he said. And when I run the Volkov family, no one in this sea will dare touch you. Not the Black Knights. Not the Blackwood family. No one. Everyone in my life kept offering me umbrellas in exchange for holding them, but this was Darien. Somewhere between the dinner, the loan, and the smuggling ledgers, asset had quietly become the wrong word for what we were, and both of us pretended not to notice, because naming a thing lets people tax it. When do we start? I said. We started with groceries. The second smuggling season, we moved 200 tons of grain through my island. Hiroko's clan paying 6 times market rate for food her people would need when the rain stopped. War prices before the war. The Foxkin ran their own star charts. Then came the continent's great pre-war auction season, where armor sold at 4 times value and knowledge sold at whatever the seller's conscience weighed. I spent 11,000 gold like a drunk sailor, 3 warrior breathing techniques, a mental detection sphere, and the purchase that would quietly bend my whole future, a manual of magic inscription, the flesh and steel rune art the great houses blockade harder than weapons. 2 loose threads from that season, both of which pull later. Marcus, the Highland agent who could get you anything, had finally sold a miracle he couldn't cover and landed in debtor's prison. I paid his debts and shipped him out to me, along with a sharp-tongued teenager named Briar, whose apothecary aptitude test had made the assessor drop his quill. Marcus became my diplomat, on the theory that a man who's lied professionally for 20 years is wasted anywhere else. Briar became my apprentice and started going through potion theory like a shark through a swimming class. And in the Shining Fortress, I'd learned this only years later, My father Valerius kept a file. Every deal I closed, every battle I won, delivered to his desk by agents I never once spotted, read alone, at night, and shown to no one. Hold that thought. It's load-bearing. The drought came exactly on the hall's schedule. First a dry spring, then a dead summer, then dust where the continent's breadbaskets used to be. Grain tripled, then stopped being sold at all in some ports. My island, drinking from its own stream and eating from its own smuggling routes, tightened its belt and held. The Orcs' planes died first, just as Darien said, and in the second year of the dust, 4 million Orcs stopped starving quietly. The Horde didn't even bother with the border fortresses. Golden behemoths the size of walking hills simply came through the mountain passes, and the fortifications of 300 years became scenery. 12 provinces drowned in fire in a season. Millions of people were marched east into the Orc lands as labor. The kingdom reeled, the coast filled with refugees, the price of everything became, "What have you got?" And into the middle of that apocalypse sailed Darien, with a plan that was equal parts brilliant and insane, and an expedition already provisioned. "The Elephant Men," he said, unrolling a map of the Orc borderlands. "The Taiyuan tribes, the Horde's heavy shock troops, and every one of their warriors is away, burning our provinces. Their border camps are down to skeleton garrisons. War merit, Corbin, mountains of it, sitting in the aggressor's own backyard, while their armies are away wrecking ours." He tapped the smuggling route. "Hiroko's people will pass us through as trade caravans, in and out before anyone important looks west. War merit, harvested from the people currently deporting my kingdom's civilians by the million. Even my conscience, a flexible instrument, pronounced it justice. I'm not going to pretend the raiding was clean. Night attacks aren't a gentleman's sport. We hit warrior camps and supply depots, burned arsenals, broke the military spine of 12 tribes, and Darien ran it colder than I could stomach. We had exactly one blazing argument, out of earshot of the men, about where the line sat. I won it. Warriors and war stores, nothing else, not negotiable. He called me soft. I called him something worse. We worked better after. The valley ambush was our masterpiece. 200 elephant warriors pursuing us into a gorge Ayla had pre-surveyed, boulders released on her count, physics doing the fighting. 10,000 merit points banked between us. And then the bill arrived, the way bills do out there, all at once, from the sky. We were 2 days from the border, column moving fast through open scrubland, when Ayla's voice went from librarian to fire alarm in a single beep. "Contact, airborne, level 14 or above, master run." His name, we learned later, was Kui, a sky warrior of the Taiyuan, the tier of being that turns armies into weather damage, and he came down ahead of our column like a thrown mountain, cratering the earth, folding his arms, and waiting, because things at his level don't chase, they let you understand. I have been afraid many times across 2 lives. That was the first time I understood, in my actual bones, what it means when something looks at your entire expedition and sees a chore. My mage's hands were shaking too hard to aim. My earth warriors, the pride of my army, arranged themselves in front of me with the quiet, terrible readiness of men buying seconds, not victory. We survived for 2 reasons. 1. Darien, without hesitating, burned a scroll worth a nobleman's estate, a level 15 holy restraint that wrapped Kuei in chains of light for exactly as long as it took us to become a dust cloud. 2. At the border, when the pursuit should have caught us anyway, Hiroko's token turned a Yogu patrol from spectators into a wall, foxkin's spears leveled at an elephant lord on their own boundary stones. The invoice for that wall, 2,000 tons of grain. Owed. During a famine. I asked Darien, wheezing somewhere in the safe zone, how in the drowned hells he planned to pay 2,000 tons of grain. He got his breath back before I did. And he smiled the smile I'd learned to fear on other people's behalf. "Corbin, what do you think I've been buying all year?" What Darien had been buying all year, with every coin of our smuggling profits, and, this is the part that stopped my heart, with our entire mountain of war merit, was grain. Every point. 10,000 plus merit, a sum that could have bought him titles, commissions, an elder's seat, converted at the Beast Slaughter Island Exchange into food at famine prices before the war ended. The exchange itself was theater worth the ticket. Darien made a public production of registering our Tribes Broken ambush-heavy campaign, 10,680 points, read aloud, twice, and let the assembled nobility gasp at the second son they'd all written off. Liam Caldwell materialized at my elbow within minutes, the way he materializes near anything appreciating in value, to congratulate me, invoice me for friendship maintenance, and ask, with zero shame, whether the rumors about my potion margins were exaggerated. Wildly, I said. Tragic, he said, and drank my wine anyway. I like Liam. He's the only honest man I know, in that he's never once pretended to be anything but for sale. And then, in front of that same gasping nobility, Darian converted the entire glittering pile into grain futures, and the gasps turned into the discreet coughing of people watching a friend ruin himself. I asked him quietly on the way out if he'd lost his mind. Watch, he said. Here's what he'd seen coming, months ahead of every noble house on the coast. The three great empires finally mobilized properly and broke the horde at Daegu. It was everything the bards say. 3,000 battle priests in formation, a floating city crossing the horizon like a second moon, a meteor called down that erased 200,000 orcs in one white flash, the Hell Knight Order grinding the Elephant Legions, and a duel between Krugar and a Seraphim that reshaped a mountain range. The orcs broke and rolled home, and they took their loot with them, millions of human captives, millions of mouths. Marching back into lands that the same drought had already stripped to the bone. The orcs had stolen more people than they could feed. So the empires, ever practical, opened ransom negotiations. Humans back, paid for in food. And every noble house on the coast looked at their emptied granaries, because they'd all sold high during the famine, clever them, and then looked at the exchange rates, and then started screaming for grain that no longer existed on the market. Darian had 10,000 tons of it sitting in warehouses, bought with war merit at yesterday's prices. We were first at Hiroko's table. The rate, 1 ton of rye, 5 grown souls, and, Darian's non-negotiable clause, we choose our own people, not whoever the orcs shoved forward. Ours to select. Warriors, craftsmen, whole families kept intact. I stood on the docks at Beast Slaughter Island and watched 20,000 human beings walk off the ships. Soldiers who'd been captured defending provinces, smiths and shipwrights and farmers, children riding on shoulders, all of them ransomed out of the Orc Empire by a disgraced second son and a bastard, while the great houses were still bidding against each other for the grain to enter the market at all. My personal cut of the operation, 452 trained warriors, 64 of them advanced rank, 300 craftsmen, and some 1,500 families, every one of whom knew exactly whose grain had bought their lives back and never forgot it. There are cheaper ways to build loyalty, but none of them actually work. My population quadrupled in a month. My army stopped being a guard and started being an army. The Loyal Lion Brigade proper under MacLeod, 400 infantry, the Green Turtle Knights under Kalen, 200 riders, a weapons workshop hammering out standardized gear, 4 fresh advanced warriors minted by my potion supply. The day we formalized the structure, I gave the assembled ranks a speech about loyalty and shared futures. What they mostly heard, I suspect, was the part where I doubled the pension fund. Same message, honestly, in the only language that doesn't lie. That was also the week I stopped lying to Darian. He was in my lab settling accounts when I put a fresh level 6 potion on the table between us, brewed start to finish while he watched. First try. Perfect. He looked at the bottle, looked at me, did the full arithmetic of 5 years in about 4 seconds. You could watch the decimal points marching behind his eyes. Your success rate. 100%, always has been. You lied to me from the beginning. I did. Good, he said. You'd have been useless to me, stupid. Then he grinned and stole the potion as a handling fee, and we never discussed it again. That's the closest thing to an embrace either of us was equipped for. Lyra, meanwhile, had been quietly getting better in a way that raised questions. She moved wrong for an aide, too balanced, too silent on stairs. She healed too fast from a workshop burn. Eventually, she stopped pretending. Before her capture, she had been a level 9 mage and a level 7 guardian of her people, a treant warden, a war-cast elf, broken in the fighting that destroyed her home and sold south in chains. What I'd freed hadn't been a clerk. It was a crippled war asset, slowly regrowing her strength like a burned tree, ring by ring. You could have told me, I said. You could have asked what you were freeing, she said. You didn't ask. That's why I stayed. The evening she told me all of it, she also stopped pretending about something else, and so did I. Some things you don't narrate to strangers. She mattered. She still does. Moving on, before Ayla starts beeping commentary, she did at the time. I've had her diagnosis of my character framed. Lecherousness, chronic. Loyalty, unexpected. Then the treasury hit red for the third time in my career. A proper crisis. Wages due, vaults echoing. And I did what any responsible administrator does. Found 3 neighbors who deserve to become revenue. Rainforest, Xiangshan, and Snow Mountain Islands. 3 hostile little lordships that had spent the year raiding my shipping and pricing my patience at 0. McLeod swept all 3 in a single day. A single day. Dawn landing, noon landing, dusk landing, 3 flags down before supper. The loot ran to 1,600 workers and 520 tons of grain, and the strategic lesson ran deeper. I'd built a hammer, and the region was still pricing me as a nail. 1 rat swam out of the wreck, a captain named Kale off Snow Mountain, who made it to Giant Eagle Island and sold the Falcon family, Old Baron House, Old Baron Pride, a heartbreaking tale about the upstart bastard, his tiny garrison, and his very stealable wealth. While that fuse crackled, 2 things happened in my favor. I broke through to level 7, High Mage, the tier where other mages start bowing first, and Victoria paid me a visit that began as a threat and ended as a treaty. She came flying the flag, all business. The Blackwood family was formally demanding that the Black Knights punish their own protected upstart, me, for eating 3 Blackwood-aligned islands. She delivered the demand like a woman reading someone else's shopping list, pacing my study, and then stopped at the window and said, not turning around, Or you and I signed something separate. 5 years. Personal alliance. My flag, not my father's. Intelligence. Harbor rights. Mutual defense. A pause with a whole career of pride packed into it. I'm tired of collecting fees from you like a toll keeper. Partners profit more. I looked at the black rows of the myriad islands offering me, personally, her personal banner, and had the rare good sense not to make a joke. Partners, I said, profit more. We signed. The Blackwood demand died in a drawer somewhere between her ship and home, and neither of us named the moment for what it was. But from that day, whenever her family's politics pointed one way and I stood the other, Victoria Draven started, quietly, consistently, standing where I stood. The Falcon family, meanwhile, took Kale's bait whole. 3 old baron houses, Falcon, Khan, Cram, pooled 2,000 troops and 4 Earth warriors into a tidy coalition with one agenda. Erase the bastard, split the estate. Darian's network handed me their fleet schedule practically before their own captains had it. 2,000 veterans against my few hundred. The brave move was to stand on my walls and die heroically. I chose the other genre. When the coalition fleet dropped anchor off Big Fish Island, horns blowing, banners flying, they found nothing. Empty streets, cold forges, not a coin, not a chicken, not a door hinge. I'd evacuated the entire population and every portable object to Beast Slaughter Island, where my ransomed thousands sat drinking tea under the incidental protection of the kingdom's North Sea fleet. No barren coalition on this ocean is insane enough to start a battle in that particular harbor. I'm told by prisoners later, who were there and still sounded haunted, that the coalition spent a full day searching the island for the trap, because surely no lord simply hands over his territory. They pried up floorboards. They sounded wells. A Cram officer reportedly insisted the population had been eaten by something and had to be talked down. 2,000 veterans in full battle order conducting a hostile invasion of an empty pantry, while their own pantries stood at home, guarded by skeleton watches, with their locations helpfully marked on charts Darian had owned for a year. And while they worked it out, Darian and I were 400 miles away with everything that could hold a blade, sacking their homes. Giant Eagle Island first, the Falcon Nest, emptied of its army. It cracked like an egg. The family vault gave up a space ring, a level 12 staff, a spellbook, an intermediate wind meditation technique, and a treasury their ancestors had spent 9 generations filling. 8,000 workers walked onto my ships, 3,000 tons of grain, and 500 tons of pig iron followed. The Falcon heirs, who'd been loud founding investors in the Kill the Bastard Fund, got exactly the dividends that fund paid. Their fortress burned behind us, a signature, so nobody would waste breath calling it banditry. This was policy. Then Cloud Mist Island, the Khan House, 500,000 in assets, and, of all treasures, an entire giant blue scorpion breeding operation, which is exactly as valuable and exactly as horrifying as it sounds. Then Red Peak Island, the Crams, where our 10 magic crystal cannons, yes, I had cannons now, loot compounds, opened the walls like a can opener, and the vault underneath repaid the whole campaign twice over. 3 old houses gutted in one season by the man they'd sailed out to erase. Total haul, north of 1 million gold. The barons rushed home to their smoking real estate and did the only thing left in their playbook, ran crying to their overlord. Which is how I ended up at White Whale Island for the tensest business meeting of my young life. My side of the table, me and Reeves, Victoria's uncle, the Black Knight's second blade, a sky warrior men called the Bloody Butcher, drumming his fingers like distant artillery. Their side, Arthur, chief commander of the Blackwood family, flint-faced. And behind Arthur, technically neutral, a hired sky warrior named Zoran, Volkov family stock, his fee paid, though I couldn't prove it yet, by a man in Highland City who was becoming my most patient enemy. The horse trading ran for hours, in that special aristocratic dialect where "we are all reasonable men" means "count my sky warriors again." The settlement. I returned half the plunder. The 3 baron families publicly declared themselves defeated, words that cost old houses more than bullion. The Blackwood family stood down, honor arithmetically restored. Half a war chest, traded for legitimacy and a superpower's shrug. I'd have paid more, and Reeves knew it, which is why he did the talking, and I did the sad face. And then Reeves, gathering his coat to leave, dropped his own invoice on the table like an anchor. "One more item. The families decided your situation needs regularizing." He smiled the way cliffs smile. "You'll marry Victoria. You into us, boy, not her out to you. The Black Knight pirate group doesn't export daughters." He clapped my shoulder with a hand like a dock crane. "Nephew-in-law. I want you to fully appreciate my position. The mightiest pirate armada in 3 seas had just informed me that I was engaged. To a woman who had once rammed my dock for fun. In front of her uncle, a man nicknamed for butchery, who was watching my face with genuine professional interest. Ayla, analysis. Beep, resistance is inadvisable. Also, Master's heart rate suggests the objection is performative. Trader chip. For services in the Baron War and, let's be honest, as a fat engagement gift, the Black Knights signed Ironflow Island over to me. A real island, fortress, deep harbor, workshops, salt fields, roads that had met an engineer. The sitting lord, Everett, got evicted with compensation. I even bought his standing grain crop off him for 200 sets of armor, because starting a tenancy with goodwill is cheaper than starting it with a grudge, and I was now a man who thought in tenancies. I stood on the walls of Ironflow Fortress, my 3rd home in this world, each one bigger than the last, a genuine stone fortress with my banner going up the pole, and allowed myself to enjoy it for one entire evening. 1. Then it was back to the grindstone, because the Ironflow years were where I stopped being a clever merchant with soldiers and started being a power. The lab leveled up first. Level 7 potions, the tier that makes guildmasters write letters, rolled off my bench within the season. A new intermediate meditation technique, Sigh of Fire, tripled the yield on my own cultivation hours. And then I opened the option manual I'd been saving like dessert. Magic Inscription. The art of carving power directly into flesh and steel. The noble houses blockade that knowledge harder than they blockade weapons, because weapons arm a man, and inscription arms a bloodline. I taught it to myself in a fortress basement, with Ayla correcting my stroke geometry in real time, and 3 brave volunteers, Jory, Zira, and Cyrus, whose names deserve the record, lending me their arms while Lyra stood by with shield spells for the explosions. There were explosions. Lyra got very good at shield spells. Jory developed a flinch that outlived the program. But at the end of the tunnel, 50 rune-carved warriors, each hitting like twice his weight class, and, the part that mattered, a lord who could produce more at will, potions, mounts, runes, mages. My army wasn't the region's biggest. It was simply built from components nobody else could buy at any price. Commerce grew a bottleneck worth mentioning because of who untied it. My potion and salt volumes had outgrown my shipping, goods piling up on Ironflow's docks faster than hulls could carry them east. The fix was a storage and transfer deal at White Whale Island, the Black Knight's great entrepot, negotiated across a table from Victoria herself. She charged me 70,000 in fees, drove the terms like a slaver's auctioneer, and then quietly threw in harbor priority and armed escort clauses worth double the fee, daring me with her eyes to thank her for it. I thanked her. She denied everything. We were, at this point, two of the richest young people on the sea, engaged to be married, communicating exclusively through invoices and insults. Court poets write about loves like ours. Accountants write about them more accurately. The sea itself tested the new walls twice that year. An azure sea emperor beast, 20 meters of scaled arrogance with a trace of dragon's blood, led ocean beast tides against Ironflow in 2 separate sieges. Both times, the island held. Lyra's treant warriors anchored the shoreline like a forest with opinions. Mage volleys walked across the surf. Giants waded in for anything that reached the sand. We came out of the second siege richer than we went in. 42 more green turtles captured and contracted for the knights, and 3 abandoned Azure Sea Emperor beast cubs, which MacLeod, Garrett, and Ragnar adopted on the spot with the hard-eyed practicality of veteran soldiers. By which I mean they baby-talked them in the stables when they thought no one could hear. Remember the cubs. One of them is about to be the most embarrassing thing in my army. MacLeod also got a side venture, a pirate group that absolutely was not mine, crewed by men who absolutely were, flying colors registered to no port. It spent its evenings relieving Vance family convoys of their cargo, the Browns being a large force, a Viscount house, with trade routes that ran fat, slow, and criminally underinsured. For months, the sea simply seemed unlucky for them, actuarially cursed. What a shame. Then, an old man from the Volkov family tipped off Viscount Sterling Vance about the source of his bad luck, and it's time I introduced you properly to the villain of this whole saga, Cassian Volkov, Darian's elder half-brother. The succession war between them had ended the year the old earl died of a poison so refined no healer could name it, in a family where exactly one son profited from the timing. On his deathbed, the old man extracted a final order. His sons must not kill each other. Cassian, a devoted and obedient boy, honored it to the letter. He never raised a hand against Darian. He outsourced. Every blade that had ever swung at me, the tipped-off Browns, the hired Sky Warrior behind Arthur, half the coincidences of the past 3 years, traced back, through cutouts and cousins, to Cassian's purse. Because Darian's money lived on my island, Darian's future lived on my island. Darian's one real ally lived on my island, and Cassian had made it his life's mission to burn that island without technically touching his brother. Hatred is a powerful force, he liked telling his own court. He'd know. The man ran on it like a mill runs on water. We got tired of paying his invoices and tried to close the account directly. An ambush on Cassian himself, at Windward Island, timed to a rare trip outside his walls, planned for a month down to the tide tables. It went the other way, and it went the other way because Cassian had planned it for longer. The convoy we hit was bait. The escort we'd counted was half the escort there was. And when Darian's boarding parties committed, a man named Dirk Jansen stood up from a covered hold and unsealed the aura of a Sky Warrior. Bought, we later confirmed, for a fee that beggared even Volkov accounts. Pre-positioned weeks in advance behind a curtain of false manifests, against exactly this ambush, by a brother who knew exactly how Darian's mind built traps. Hatred is a powerful force. So, unfortunately, is being genuinely good at it. Darian escaped with his life because his men made it expensive. His guards, his fleet, and the last of his independent power did not escape at all. He arrived at my island days later with a handful of survivors, salt-crusted, hollow-eyed, carrying the expression of a man whose house has burned down with his old life inside it. I let him sleep a day. Then I appointed him Grand Administrator of my entire territory, full authority over civil affairs, answerable to no one but me. Charity, he said, dangerous quiet. Charity? You're the best administrator on this sea, and I've been running 100,000 gold economy out of a notebook and Ayla's patience. I'm exploiting you at the moment of your lowest market value. Sign here. He stared at me a long moment, reading the kindness inside the insult, the way I'd once read the insult inside his kindness at that first dinner, and signed. Then he handed over the last 2 treasures he'd smuggled out of the wreck, Silas and Garrett, 2 earth warriors of his personal guard, sworn to me. And then he buried his grief the way he buried everything, under work, immediately, at volume. Within a month, my administrative chaos had become 3 clean departments, political affairs, military affairs, and a surveillance office under old Kenji that soon knew what my enemies ate for breakfast and which of my friends talked in their sleep. 18 standing rules, payroll on time, and out of hiding came the assets Cassian's purge had missed. Darian's concealed merchant network folded into my treasury, and 30-plus Thunderbird Knights, actual flying cavalry, storm-riding raptors and their riders, landed on Ironflow like a bonus from a generous god. Cassian had spent a fortune to destroy his brother. What he'd actually accomplished was firing my co-founder from his old job so the man could finally work for me full-time. I drafted a thank you note, read it aloud at dinner, and let Darian burn it in the candelabra. He felt better, slightly. The Browns came for their revenge that autumn, as tipped and as funded. 3,500 troops on transports, 10 magic crystal cannons, 2 Earth Warriors, the full angry Viscount package, sailing on Ironflow with intent to end the upstart while the upstart was still endable. It was the first time I let the world see what I'd actually been building. The Mage Corps came out of hiding, 100 robes on the wall, Reese's worthless children, now intermediate mages, raining coordinated fire. Lyra's treant warriors strode out of the orchards, bark-armored giants she'd grown from her recovering guardian's power. And Ayla ran counter-battery calculations off the enemy muzzle flashes. All 10 Vance cannons died before lunch, out-sniped by guns they never located. The landing broke on the beach. The survivors broke on the walls. By sunset, Viscount Sterling was in my hall, gray-faced, signing reparations of 550,000 gold. And then, my favorite part. Mid-negotiation, with witnesses seated and a recording sphere warm, I let slip how tragic it was that his house had been aimed at me like a rented crossbow. Sterling, drowning and eager to share the blame, grabbed the rope with both hands, named the Volkov chief, named the intermediary, named the promises, dates, sums, all of it, on record, in front of nobles whose testimony counted. A signed, witnessed account of Cassian Volkov orchestrating an attack on a Terra Kingdom pioneer lord. I filed it in the vault next to my patients. Both were compounding nicely. The peace dividend went into steel. The Bastion Brigade stood up that winter, 300-plus heavy infantry, every man rune inscribed by my own hand, armored until they looked like the fortress they were named for. I broke through to level 9 and picked up a ring of mind that stretched my mental ceiling another span. Briar hit her stride. The girl could hold stable potion output for 5 straight minutes, which in apothecary terms is like holding a handstand for an afternoon. My succession planning, such as it was, consisted of her, Ayla, and a locked drawer of formulas labeled, "If I do something stupid." And then Reeves came to collect on his fishing trip. The engagement ceremony was held at Double Door Island, the Black Knight's fortress capital, a stone crown on the sea, in front of enough assembled piracy to conquer a mid-sized kingdom. Liam Caldwell attended, uninvited, to gawk and systematically destroy the buffet. Magnus Draven, Victoria's father, commander of the whole armada, a man whose handshake felt like a mountain deciding not to fall on you, took me aside beforehand for a private conversation that consisted of 2 glasses of terrifying liquor, several geological silences, and 1 sentence: "Make her cry, and no sea is wide enough." Standard father material, delivered by a man with a kill count in 5 digits. I drank the terrifying liquor. Victoria wore war-plundered jewels and a smirk. I wore my best robe and the expression of a hostage at his own birthday party. And when the toasts were done and the rite demanded it, she kissed me in front of 3,000 pirates, to a roar you could hear across the strait, then pulled back just far enough to whisper against my ear, sweet as a blade coming out of a sheath. 1 year, then you marry me properly. Try to be richer by then. I left the celebration early, as etiquette permitted, with my dignity mostly intact, my collar smelling of her perfume, and my calendar mysteriously full of wedding-adjacent dread. Raid month number 3 closed out the year, and this one had a complication. The North Sea Fleet, under new and irritatingly honest management, had begun surprise inspections of returning raiders. Moving crystal shipments through my island suddenly carried real risk. Darian's workaround was elegant, insane, and flattering. Don't smuggle the potions. Smuggle the apothecary, me, across the border. In person, in a foxkin caravan, brewing on-site in a Yugu compound with Hiroko's guards on the doors and Ayla having quiet electronic hysterics about the security situation. I refined 72 level 9 potions in 14 days, a batch worth a war, and the payment negotiated for that batch changed the shape of my army forever. The Boulder Tribe, 300 earth giants, 5 meters of muscle apiece, skin like shield wall, appetites like municipal disasters. Their chief, Garok, stood 8 meters and could arm wrestle a top earth warrior into the ground, and his tribe had been starved half to death by the drought and the war's wreckage. The deal Hiroko brokered: my grain, my potions, my pay, their contract, 5 years. They walked onto my transports carrying their own boulders as ballast, ate a month's budget on the crossing, and stepped ashore at Ironflow as the single most terrifying heavy infantry this sea had ever hosted. We forged them armor that consumed more steel than a fleet. Watching Garok spar my Earth Warrior Luge was like watching a landslide box a bear. My food ledger wept openly at council. My enemies were about to weep harder. And at that exact moment, me at my strongest, engaged into the sea's top power, giants gleaming on my walls, my vault holding a testimony that could hang his family, is when Cassian Volkov stopped renting knives and composed his masterpiece. He aimed the entire world at my father-in-law. Here is how you kill a power too big to fight. You don't. You make everyone else do it, and you stay home. A rumor began moving through the Sea of Myriad Islands that season, the kind of rumor that travels faster than plague and quarantines worse. The Redbeard pirate's treasure, the hoard of an ancient level 18 pirate king, a legend priced by drunk sailors at over 100 million gold, lost for centuries, had been found. And the finders, said the rumor, were the Black Knight pirate group, sitting on it inside Black Fortress and telling no one. Nonsense, obviously. Treasure rumors wash through these islands twice a decade. This one should have died in a month. Then, a golden light anomaly lit the night sky over one of the Black Knight's western islands, staged so well that 1,000 independent sailors swore on their mothers they'd seen the glow of an opened hoard. The rumor got a second wind and a location, and then Cliff Hardy defected. Commander of the Green Turtle Knights of the Black Knight Pirate Group, 20 years of service, 20 years of trust, and a Blackwood plant since the day he first signed on. He walked into a noble council session and confirmed the treasure with an insider's tearful detail. 20 years. The mole had been growing for 20 years, watered and waiting, and Cassian Volkov, because this whole symphony was his, we traced the sheet music later, had known exactly where to find him and exactly when to spend him. That was the day I truly understood the Volkov family. They didn't play chess, they gardened. They planted trees decades early, and one morning you woke up and there was an orchard around your house, and every branch held a noose. 100 million gold does something chemical to collective reason. The Pirate Alliance demanded a share. The Noble Council demanded custody. And when Magnus Draven stood on his walls and said, truthfully, that there was no treasure, the whole sea heard exactly what greed always hears. He's keeping it for himself. 5 overlord powers signed the compact: the Blackwood family, the Collin family, the Ghost Pirates, the Yu Lang Pirates, the Barnes family, plus 26 large forces beneath them. 50,000 troops sailed on Doubledore Island. The Black Knight's own vassal forces, reading the arithmetic, defected in clusters. 5 major banners turned in a single week. I got the warning through Darian's network days ahead and sent word to Magnus begging him to evacuate, negotiate, disperse the fleet, anything. What Magnus sent back was not a reply to me. It was Reeves, his brother in all but blood, his strongest blade, ordered away from the coming battle with a handful of trusted men to White Whale Island, to guard Victoria, and to carry to her the last message her father would ever compose. Corbin cannot be trusted. He was wrong about me, and I never once, then or since, managed to be angry about it. A drowning man had used his last free breath to push his daughter away from the whirlpool. Every hand pushed away, even mine, in case any hand held a stone. Fathers. The Blackwood family hit White Whale Island first, ahead of the main battle. Of course they did. An heiress makes a lovely hostage, and Arthur, their chief commander, personally led 100 warships to collect her. Reeves met him in the air over the docks, 2 top sky warriors turning the sky into a hammer mill, while Victoria's crews scrambled for open water, Reeves buying minutes with his own body, his handful of men dying on the tide line to hold the boarding parties, all of it a rearguard for one ship. And on the deck of that one ship, the Black Rose, as it cleared the harbor mouth, the real knife came out. Cutter Caleb, Victoria's personal guard, the wall of muscle who'd flattened McLeod on my first day in these waters, the man who had stood behind her chair for 10 years, tasted her food, carried her childhood secrets. Blackwood family, planted. Same gardener's method as Cliff Hardy, this entire war was a puppet show and the strings were older than my arrival on this world. He put his blade into her back at point-blank range, mid-evacuation, with her guard's eyes on the enemy fleet. The blow threw her the length of the deck, and then 6 more loyal crewmen drew steel on their brothers, and the deck of the Black Rose became a battle of brothers against brothers. Caleb's one mistake was intelligence 10 years stale. Because my fiancé had quietly broken through to Earth Warrior and told no one, not her father, not her uncle, not me. She got up, coughing red, swaying, sword clearing the sheath, and the whole deck stopped, because dead women don't stand. She asked him one question, while her loyal officer Franz carved through the traitors behind her. 10 years, Caleb. Was I ever anything but kind to you? And Caleb, to his sliver of credit, dropped the sneer for one honest second before answering that his family had always been in Blackwood hands and his choices with them. Then no need for sorry, she said. The dead don't apologize to the living. The duel was ugly. She was wounded, he was desperate, and desperation fences dirty. But her blade work had been tutored by monsters since she could walk, and her battle chi burned purer than his, and in the end she put her point through his chest to the crossguard. Caleb, cockroach to the last, tore himself free of the steel and dove into the sea rather than die honestly. Franz finished the remaining traitors, caught his lady as she finally folded, and the Black Rose vanished into gray water under Reeves's burning rearguard. Victoria escaped with her life. Her father was never offered the option. The siege of Black Fortress lasted 1 day. 50,000 troops in 4 grand assaults, hundreds of siege engines, a combined mage corps flinging level 12 annihilation at walls built by 3 generations of pirate kings. Magnus fought it like the legend he was. His heavy cannon, the Type 2, a gun whose every shell cost a manor, dueled the Blackwood lines all morning and forced an overlord family to scatter like startled gulls. His knights plugged every breach. At the worst hour, he personally led 1,000 green turtle riders out the south gate into the center of 20,000 men to gut the Blackwood command tent, because if you're going to drown, you may as well drown with your hand around a throat. But the arithmetic was 50,000 against 5, and every man on both walls knew the shape of the ending. Which is why, when the walls finally failed, Magnus Draven stood in the breach, took out a bottle the color of arterial dusk, looked at it for one long moment, they say with something like regret, they say with something like relief, and drank. Demon's Whisper. A forbidden potion of the 18th level, the kind whose recipe begins with a shred of a Saint Realm demon's soul, the kind whose price is written on the drinker in a currency collected after. For a handful of hours, it makes a top sky warrior into a saint. Afterward, there is no afterward. The demons keep their books balanced. I'll spare you the hours. The numbers say it cleaner than any description. Nearly 10,000 of the coalition dead by one being's hand. Aliu Blackwood, chief of the Blackwood family, dead. Horace Collin, chief of the Collin family, dead. Demots, commander of the Ghost Pirates, dead. More than 10 Sky Warriors, the irreplaceable tier, the decades to grow tier, dead. When the light finally guttered out, Magnus's body fell among the men he'd taken with him. His soul went where forbidden contracts send them, and 5 overlord powers lay broken, treasuries and armies both, on the field where they'd come to take a horde that had never existed. The Ghost Pirates began their civil war before the pyres were cold. The Yulang and Barnes survivors limped home to defend cores they could no longer garrison. The Blackwood family, victorious on paper, had won itself a generation of funerals. And in Highland City, Cassian Volkov read the reports and, I have this from a servant Darian later bought, smiled, once, thinly, and asked whether his brother's island had been informed. His plan had worked perfectly. And overreached catastrophically, because with 6 overlords dead or maimed in a single day, the Sea of Myriad Islands lost all its landlords at once, every fence, every border, every protection racket that had kept ambitious little lords politely contained simply stopped existing between one tide and the next. Darian and I stood over the map that night with the casualty lists, and I watched grief and arithmetic fight for his face. His family had done this, to spite him, and in doing it, had uncaged us. "They're all wounded," he said at last, very quietly. "Every single power that could ever have stopped you is wounded." "Then we expand," I said, "before the wounds close." We drew the first circle on the map that same hour, around a big island east of Ironflow, and the conference room filled with the low, cheerful, chilling sound of two men planning in a world suddenly without adults. The expansion opened like a dam failing. Within 3 days, 6 small forces around Ironflow were mine. Most barely fought. My fleet appeared off their harbors, giants visible on the decks, entirely on purpose, and their lords discovered urgent business in other archipelagos. The spoils clogged my docks for a week solid. Zahir, my accountant, worked the keys with a voice gone hoarse from joy, directing cargo like a man conducting an orchestra made of money. 100,000 gold in assets from the first sweep alone, plus ships, grain, iron, and 4,000 new subjects to feed, wash, and put on payroll. The surviving neighbors did the sensible thing, panicked collectively. Led by the Iron Hook and Scarlet Pirate groups, the two medium powers of our stretch of sea, a dozen forces pooled 3,000 troops inside Iron Hook's famous giant stone fortress. 10 years in the building, 12-meter enchanted walls, arrow towers with magic ballistas, a gate of riveted, refined iron. The old pirate Iron Hook, 60 years old, kind grandfather's face, an actual iron hook for a right hand, had once boasted that not even a large force could crack his home. They gathered in there and dared me to come. So I came. Mostly because I was genuinely curious what my new employees could do to a fortress. The answer arrived in the first 20 minutes. My cannons chipped a notch in the wall's crown. Respectable enchantments, truly. And then Garak, 8 meters of chieftain in custom plate, looked at the 12-meter wall, backed up 10 paces, and ran. Up. The wall. 2 strides on sheer stone, 1 hand in the artillery notch, and suddenly there was a giant on the ramparts. 5-meter blades sweeping lanes through the garrison, with his 2 lieutenants landing beside him like the 2nd and 3rd meteors of a very bad morning. The defenders' formation didn't break, it evaporated, and the funniest thing I have ever seen on a battlefield followed. 100 more giants poured over the wall and got so excited that discipline lost its grip entirely. Giants hopping down into the courtyard to chase armored pirates the way cats chase pigeons. MacLeod on the rampart bellowing orders that affected nothing. The entire assault dissolving into an enthusiastic giant playground. Then Garak filled his lungs and deployed the one threat giant discipline actually answers to. Back in line, or no food for 3 days. I want history to record that 100 rampaging siege monsters snapped back into parade formation faster than any royal guard I have ever seen. My most terrifying soldiers are motivated exclusively by dinner. I sleep wonderfully. Giant stone fortress, 10 years, countless fortunes, not even a large force, fell in an afternoon. In the Great Hall afterward, the dozen captured leaders tried claiming Black Knight protection, which was bold given they'd all publicly quit the Black Knights when the coalition sailed. I pointed this out. They argued the resignation hadn't been accepted and therefore didn't count. Grown men, lords, arguing return policy on their own treachery. One of them worked himself up into a speech about how I'd come to no good end, and got precisely 1 sentence into it before MacLeod's greatsword retired him from public speaking. The others discovered a sudden warm consensus around the ransom option. A month of consolidation later, Darian stood up at council with his thick notebook and read out a ledger that sounded like a fever dream. 18 small forces and 2 medium ones absorbed, territory up more than tenfold, 22 islands under direct control, 1,100 square kilometers of land. Spoils totaling 1,430,000 gold, coin, ships, metals, grain, gear. The department heads grinned so wide, Darian threatened to bill them for the candles their teeth were outshining. We also absorbed 600 prisoners of war into the ranks, only married men with families, only those without blood grudges against us, each one screened by MacLeod personally, because Darian's recruiting doctrine was carved in stone. Loyalty begins with something to lose. Among them came a quiet level 10 Earth warrior named Bryce, 40 years old, no ambition, good reputation. I flagged his file. Watch, then trust. Both happened on schedule. That left exactly one real power between me and the entire northwest of this sea, the Blackwood family, Viscounts of Ice Island. Old money, 3,000 troops, dozens of ice mages, a fortress a decade in the making, and, my great good fortune, a chief who was busy proving that greed is a security vulnerability. Torvin Blackwood had committed the family's main army to the scramble for Double Door Island, the Black Knight's ownerless capital, and was winning there, 400 square kilometers of the fat East Island already under his flag. His younger brother Orion, the competent one, you could tell because he was frightened, begged him to bring the army home before I noticed the empty nest. I have the account of that argument from Orion himself, later. Torvin recited the sunk costs, the spent favors, the dead soldiers already invested in Doubledore, and asked how he'd explain a retreat to the clan if Corbin then failed to attack. Corbin did not fail to attack. Orion came home with 1,000 men to hold a 3,000-man position, and to his credit, he tried everything. When my fleet appeared off Ice Island, he refused the harbor fight, took his dozens of warships out, and ran a delaying pattern along the coast. Hold 3 days, he told his men. The chief will return with the main army in 3 days. It was a good plan against a normal enemy. I am not a normal enemy. His magic crystal cannons fired on my turtle knights. Kalen called one word, dive, and 300 cavalry vanished under the surface while the shells churned empty sea. His cannon crews re-aimed at my flagships. 40 Thunderbird knights fell out of the cloud ceiling and melted all 6 guns into slag with living lightning before his archers finished drawing. In the space of an hour, his fleet had no artillery, no speed advantage, no depth to retreat into. He spent his last move on the only thing left worth buying. He ordered his heavy infantry away on 2 fast ships to preserve some seed of the family's strength, and turned his own vessel to cover their retreat, one Earth warrior offering himself as the toll. When we took him off that deck, I had him escorted, not chained. Competence in a doomed cause is the one enemy quality I refuse to disrespect. Ice Island surrendered by nightfall, and walking its fortress the next morning, I understood what Torvin had gambled away. The island was 10 times Ironflow's size. The castle behind the port had cost the Owens a decade and a fortune. 15-meter enchanted walls with flowing inscription light, arrow towers, concealed gun emplacements, an inner keep with actual gardens, and a 6-story donjon. If the family's full army had been home, taking this place would have bled me white even with giants. From today, this castle is Chiming Fortress, I announced from the keep steps, our new capital. The vaults were thinner than they should have been. Orion, in his one act of successful defiance, had shipped out the family's treasures and gold overnight while I was still at sea. I cursed him thoroughly and gained $1 million in fixed assets anyway. Workshops, docks, warehouses, and the ice element magic herb fields that had made the Owens rich, row on row of frost-blooming agriculture that needed only mages I didn't yet have enough of. Population of my territory, past 100,000. Standing army, 2,500 and climbing, with giants, mages, cavalry that swims, and cavalry that flies. 6 years ago, I'd been a bleeding kid in a carriage with a chip in his head and a knife at his throat. The neighbors had noticed. Everything on this sea that could crawl, swim, or scheme now decided to deal with me at once, and so, with worse timing than any of them, did my family. But first, the domestic comedy. Flush with victory, my commanders each submitted formal expansion plans for their branches. I opened the stack expecting professionalism. Kalen wanted the Turtle Knights brought to full brigade strength, reasonable, via 1 million gold in potions and purchased mounts. The Cloud wanted the Bastion Brigade doubled and every man upgraded to intermediate inscriptions. Ragnar wanted a flock of adult Thunderbirds at 3,000 gold a bird. Silas wanted an entire cavalry brigade with imported war horses. Rorik wanted a 2nd infantry brigade. Even Lyra, my reasonable one, had slipped a request into the pile to double the mage corps and equip every mage with a staff. Stacked together, my officers' modest proposals cost roughly the gross product of a small kingdom. I slammed the table hard enough to jump the inkwells. Darian, arriving to defend military investment on principle, picked up the stack, read 2 pages, and developed a forehead vein visible from across the room. "Did you draft these?" he asked the room, with terrible courtesy. For an overlord-level force? Watching the man who once bought me 100 workers as a party favor discover fiscal outrage from the paying side remains one of the great pleasures of my life. The plans went back for revision under threat of forfeited war bonuses. Rorik's survived intact, light infantry is cheap, and Darien respects a bargain. Silas got his cavalry at 500 instead of a brigade. Ragnar got his Thunderbirds in installments that made my heart bleed at a sustainable rate. Everyone else got the word halved and a lecture. And while my officers sulked productively, 2 conspiracies were already closing on my island from opposite directions, neither one aware of the other. Remember that geometry. It's going to be beautiful. Conspiracy number 1 convened in Highland City, at the top of the Volkov Castle, where Cassian was having the opposite of a good year. He'd spent a fortune and a 20-year mole to destroy the Black Knights, mostly to get at Darien and me. Actual result? The 2 of us had inherited the neighborhood. His own elders had begun asking, in the careful voices elders use before they sharpen anything, why the family's wealth kept converting itself into my career. His response was on brand, other people's hands. Volkov envoys went out to the 4 great pirate groups squatting on Double Door Island, Skull King, Deep Sea Spectre, Blood Color, Dark One, and to the freshly homeless Blackwood family, and stitched them into a coalition with one shared agenda: evict Corbin, restore Blackwood, and above all, bleed the bastard white. The public demand, when it arrived at my hall under a war seal, withdraw from Ice Island and pay the Blackwood family 1 million gold in damages. The private math. 8,000 troops, over 20 Earth Warriors, and at least 3 Sky Warriors, against my 0. Conspiracy number 2 convened in the Shining Fortress, in a perfumed room I used to be beaten outside of. My father's wife, Madame Beatrice, a woman whose intuition, I learn, frightened even Valerius, had a problem. Her youngest son, Alden, was nearing majority, with no title in prospect, the eldest having locked up the inheritance. Her advisor on the matter was a certain butler, Malachi. Of course, Malachi, who suggested, ever so humbly, that there was a bastard out in the sea of myriad islands sitting on a Viscount-grade territory that would suit the young master beautifully. The mechanism was even legal. Have the Elder Council formally add Corbin to the family registry. Congratulations, boy, you're finally a thorn. Whereupon a bastard's holdings could be lawfully absorbed and reassigned to true-born blood. No kingdom's noble council would blink. Bastards exist to be harvested. 2 armies, both stronger than me, converging on the same island, weeks apart, neither aware of the other. While the storm gathered, I did my rounds, because a lord who only appears for victories is a flag, not a leader. At the military camp gates, a bear-built recruit named Grit nearly dislocated himself bowing. One of my ransomed men fed on my potions, cultivating like a house on fire. I stopped and asked after his training by name. I'd read his file the night before. I read all their files. That trick is free, and it buys what gold can't. Darien, walking beside me, watched the man float back to his barracks on pure devotion, and remarked that my talent for winning hearts was no accident. I told him he should study it, given how thoroughly his own people had once been bought out from under him. He didn't speak to me for a full minute. Worth it. Inside the camp, I dropped the year's real bombshell on the officers. I'd quietly crossed into intermediate magic inscription, 500 gold of materials per carving, a cost that used to be fantasy and was now a line item. And the first 100 intermediate runes would go to whichever bastion men broke through to intermediate warrior within 3 months. The parade ground noise that followed was not regulation. Rorik immediately begged runes for the loyal lions and got into a public bidding war with MacLeod over transferred veterans that I had to break up like a bar fight. Good. Armies that squabble over training slots are armies that train. The ledger's dark line that season was grain. My population had tripled past what my fields could ever feed, and self-sufficiency was now officially a memory. 6,000 tons of harvest against a monthly burn of 2,000. The difference bought abroad, forever, at whatever the market felt like charging. File that worry. It doesn't go away. It compounds quietly, under everything that follows, the way real problems do while you're busy with dramatic ones. Before either conspiracy made landfall, though, Heaven decided my plate looked empty and sent me the Church of Dawn. A single warship flying the Sunrise flag docked at Ice Island, and down the gangplank came a young woman who made my brain stop doing arithmetic for the first time in 6 years. Teresa. Holy Maiden Candidate. Robes like woven daylight, a face the heavens had clearly shone off on, and the kind of untouchable purity that makes a certain kind of man want to ruin his own life. I am that kind of man. I stared the way merchants stare at unguarded vaults. Then her escort disembarked, and my blood pressure corrected itself. 2 sky warriors in gold, and an old man in red whose presence brushed my senses like a mountain politely clearing its throat. Saint Realm. An actual Saint Realm expert on my dock? Because the church was hunting the source of Magnus's forbidden potion across every major force in the region, and the dead man's almost son-in-law made the interview list. They wanted me under a truth spell. Insulting, invasive, and completely non-optional given the red-robed mountain. So I did the only dignified thing and haggled. If the Church of Dawn wanted my devout cooperation, the Church of Dawn could establish a chapel in my territory. I'd even fund the construction. My single condition, Teresa should stay on as its bishop. Subtle as a brick through stained glass. She saw through it in a second and looked at me like something she'd found under a dock. Her guardians hastily explained that Holy Maiden candidates do not staff village chapels. I performed heartbroken piety. And then the spell went ahead, Ayla diving deep and silent in my skull on my order, because the one secret that could truly kill me was her. The actual interrogation I passed clean. No cult ties, no knowledge of the potion's source. The old saint pronounced the matter closed. Teresa began winding down the spell and then paused. She looked at the entranced, defenseless, honest version of me. She remembered every second of my staring, and she asked one bonus question with a cunning little light in her eyes. Why do you truly wish for a chapel in your territory? And the entranced, defenseless, honest version of me, a man with no survival instincts whatsoever, a man I have never been formally introduced to, delivered, in front of my own officers, a full and detailed confession regarding my intention to keep the beautiful Teresa on this island and make her fall for me so thoroughly she'd follow me around admitting I was the most charming lord alive. I woke up to the sensation of being beaten by a holy maiden, not spiritually, physically, percussively. She hammered me across my own audience hall, while the red-robed elder held my sky warrior-less guards politely frozen. And the beating only ended when her teacher peeled her off with the weary air of a man who has done this before. The church sailed away. My face healed in 3 days under potions. My reputation never did. Darian performed dramatic reenactments at council for a month. And on the church's flagship, unbeknownst to me, a furious Holy Maiden candidate was being consoled by her teacher with a promise. Her senior sister would be assigned to the new chapel. Her senior sister would get justice. 2 months later, Justice docked at my island with a cargo fleet and a garrison of armed church guardians. Bishop Katya, 30, mature the way a drawn bow is mature, a level 12 priest wrapped in a golden vestment and an expression of preloaded contempt. Her opening move was letting her guardians fence off my own dock. Mine was ordering Rorik to disarm every one of them on the spot, since no foreign force bears weapons in my territory. Her second move was announcing, at full public volume, that she'd heard all about the lecherous lord from her junior sister Teresa and had come prepared. War at first sight. Pin this thread. It pays off in the most ridiculous way anything in this story pays off. And then the real storms made landfall, both in the same month. The Five Powers ultimatum, with its 8,000 troops and its million gold invoice. And Darian, walking into my war council holding a letter from his Highland contacts, wearing an expression I'd never seen on him. The Thorne and Croft families had jointly raised 2,000 elite troops, rented 20 warships, and sailed. Destination, me. Purpose, recall the newly registered family member to serve the clan, and install little brother Alden in his conveniently vacated territory. I sat there holding both documents, one in each hand, like the world's worst set of scales. Options, I said. We burned 2 hours. Fight the family fleet at sea, Darian vetoed it. 2 sky warriors, and even a win would leave us too torn to face the Five Powers. Fortify and defy both, vetoed. Qiming's walls couldn't hold 8,000, plus 2,000, with my 0 sky warriors. Buy one side off, I'd already tried. My envoys to the 4 pirate groups had come back with the same answer 4 times, which meant Cassian's gold had gotten there first. This won't work, that won't work, then produce a plan yourself, I may have shouted. Darian may have shouted back something about my life's savings and my impulse control. We were, in retrospect, magnificent under pressure. And then, the window of my own conference room, top floor, 40 meters of sheer wall below it, opened from the outside. A man stepped through like he was entering his own kitchen, crossed the room before either of us finished standing, and dropped Darian with one precise chop to the neck, mid-sentence. My grand administrator folded onto the carpet like laundry, and I had a shield spell half-formed and a scream for the guards half-swallowed when the intruder went down on one knee and bowed his head. "Young master, my name is Shadow. Lord Valerius, your father, sent me to protect you. You knocked out my administrator. Lord Valerius instructed that my existence remain secret, young master. Your subordinate resolved the witness problem non-lethally." A pause. "Please punish me." Level 15 Sky Warrior. I could feel it now that he'd unsealed it, a pressure like standing under a held avalanche. The apex tier of this entire sea, the Black Knights at their height had owned exactly 2 such men. My father had grown one in secret, off the family's books, and shipped him to me like contraband, along with a letter, in Valerius's own hand, that rearranged everything I thought I knew about my situation. The letter said, "The expedition was the Elder Council's scheme, not his." It said, "Don't hold back, Thornmen included, they're the Elders faction, and I'll thank you for thinning it." It said, "Your brother Alden is a spoiled child being steered, spare his life." It said, "Shadow answers to you now, even if the fortress falls, he can carry you out alive." And it closed, "I wish you to radiate your unique brilliance in this world. I will be proud of you, Valerius Thorn." I sat with that letter a long time. The previous Corbin's memories were full of this man's silences. Every beating he didn't stop, every winter he didn't ask about. I didn't forgive him. It wasn't mine to forgive. The boy who could have was gone. But I pocketed the Sky Warrior because sentiment is complicated and arithmetic isn't. Darian woke up furious, read the letter, got more furious on both our behalfs. He couldn't have waited until you were alone? If even I can't be trusted, your corpse would be 3 years old. And then went quiet, watching me pace, because he knew my pacing the way sailors know weather. 2 armies, both stronger than me, both wanting the same island, arriving days apart, neither aware of the other. You don't fight 2 armies, you introduce them. I laid it out loud once, end to end, just to hear whether it sounded as insane as it felt. Darian listened without blinking. When I finished, he was silent for a 5 count, and then he said, with something between horror and religious awe, "Corbin, I have never in my life met anyone as shameless as you." From him, a knighthood. The Thorncroft fleet arrived to find flags, garlands, musicians, and thousands of my subjects cheering on the dock. A welcome so warm the expedition's commanders stood at their rails visibly recalculating. Let me introduce the marks. Gideon Thorn, my uncle, a slab of armored arrogance who believed the family name parted seas. Renato Croft, quieter, sharper, my brother's maternal uncle and the expedition's actual brain, visibly suspicious of how well this was going. And the prize himself, little brother Alden, 17, silk-wrapped, freshly seasick. He'd thrown up 5 times on the crossing and complained, per my later sources, that mother should have arranged a territory he could reach by carriage. I met them at the gangplank with the deepest bows my spine could counterfeit. Gideon asked how a bastard had built all this in 6 years. I told him, eyes down, voice trembling with humility, that it was entirely thanks to the mighty Thorn name, famous and feared across the Sea of Myriad Islands. The Sea of Myriad Islands has never heard of the Thorn family. The royal house of Terra itself barely registers out here. Gideon absorbed my flattery the way soil absorbs rain, visibly swelled, and from that moment treated every miracle on my island as the natural yield of his own surname. Renato's eyes narrowed, but suspicious and correct is worthless when your co-commander has already declared victory, and colleagues, that is why you never staff an expedition with exactly 1 brain. They announced my promotion, vice captain of the family mage corps, effective immediately, my territory to be held in trust by the family during my absence. Held in trust. I performed anguish. I performed a broken man's obedience. Alden strutted down the plank, patted my shoulder, and told me to travel safe. He'd take excellent care of my territory. Behind him shuffled Malachi, the butler himself, come along to manage the young master's new household, who hissed at me to show proper respect to true-born blood. I looked at the man who had choreographed my childhood beatings, now arrived to help gift-wrap my life's work, and I bowed, low. A masterclass in patience. In my head, Ayla was running a countdown. She claims she wasn't, but she was. The handover took 3 days, and I gave them everything. The castle. Alden moved into my chambers. I relocated to the barracks, with theatrical meekness. The ledgers, the workshops, the keys, the seals. Darian briefed them on the territory's finances with immaculate honesty, and their eyes shone brighter with every page. The one thing I could not give them, I explained with wet eyes, was my famous army, the giants, the beast knights, the mage corps the family's intelligence had described. All dead, lost in the terrible war with the Owens. Yes, the giants too. War is cruel. All that remained was the poor loyal lion garrison they could see drilling badly on the parade ground, 2,000 shuffling recruits with dented gear, commanded by Rorik, who has never received the acting recognition he deserves. My actual army, at that hour, was parked on an uninhabited island over the horizon, eating well and staying out of sight. Gideon bought it whole. Renato didn't, he pressed. I shrugged. He pressed again. Gideon got bored and overruled him. They confined their vigilance to garrisoning the fortress against a double-cross from me. From me. Bless them. They were guarding the front door of a house I'd already sold. One loose thread nearly unraveled everything. Katya. The bishop was no fool. She'd watched the theater from her chapel, pieced together what had to be coming, and slipped out the back door at night to warn the Solomons. Not from any love of them, purely to wreck my scheme and watch me drown. She made it one step past the threshold, where Shadow was leaning against the wall in the dark like a bad omen with excellent posture, and informed her, pleasantly, that for the next 3 days church personnel would be enjoying the indoors. She weighed her level 12 against whatever that shadow was, chose life, and went back inside so fast her vestment cracked like a flag. Even her spite had a survival instinct. I respected it. Then, under cover of night, I boarded an unmarked two-master with Darian and sailed away, tragically recalled to the family, tragically dispossessed, tragically unavailable for the next several days. Behind me, Renato and Gideon toasted the easiest conquest in Thorn history. 3 days later, the Five Powers 8,000 landed to evict me from Ice Island, and found, flying over my fortress, the banners of 2 noble houses nobody on this ocean had ever heard of, and 2 furious sky warriors on my walls demanding to know who dared trespass on Thorn property. I want you to imagine Torvin Blackwood's face. He'd emptied his family's vaults to buy this coalition. He'd come to reclaim his ancestral castle from the bastard upstart, and the bastard wasn't even in the building. Standing in his place, heavily armed aristocrats from a landlocked province, loudly insisting on the fame of a name with 0 nautical miles of recognition, while 4 pirate commanders squinted up at them, asking each other who in the drowned hells these people were. The negotiation transcript deserves opera. Gideon, informed that no one present had heard of the Thorn family, took it not as geography, but as blasphemy. Barden, of the Skull King Pirates, a man with negative patience for nobility on a good day, demanded they hand over Corbin and 1 million gold. Gideon declared that an old marquee house does not pay pirates. Torvin, realizing his war was about to be spent evicting the wrong enemy, shrieked facts at everyone and was believed by no one. And Renato, poor, clever, doomed Renato, grasped the entire shape of my trap in real time and spent the whole parley trying to buy a peaceful retreat, and he was actually getting there, negotiating a face-saving withdrawal right up until the moment it stopped mattering. Because on the wall, in the garrison of shuffling recruits everyone had dismissed, Rorik touched off the hidden magic crystal cannon I'd left him and dropped a shell into the middle of the pirate lines. Nobody on a battlefield asks who fired the first shot twice. 50 pirate cannons answered, and my 2 problems began, with tremendous enthusiasm, solving each other. It was, by every account I collected afterward, a terrific battle, and I flinched only at the parts itemized in gold. Barden shelled the walls without caring whose troops stood on them, at one point firing into a melee containing his own vanguard, a decision that told me everything I'd ever need to know about allying with him. The 5 Powers combined Mage Corps took my beautiful fortress apart, spell by spell. Every report of a breached rampart was a personal invoice. The Thorn elites, and credit where due, those 500 professional soldiers fought like the elite they were, held 2,000 attackers at ratios that should be taught in academies, and were ground down from 2,000 men to 100 huddled survivors in the keep. Renato and Gideon emptied their Sky Warrior strength swatting cannonballs out of the air until they had nothing left to duel anyone with. And Torvin Blackwood, whose restoration this war nominally was, watched his own allies bill him mid-siege. The pirates stripped his spoils rights and half his remaining people as compensation for faulty intelligence about my Sky Warriors. Being Cassian's cat's paw carries a brutal expense report. Somebody should warn the applicants. And when both sides were properly bled, the family troops broken in the keep, the pirates 1,000 men poorer and thoroughly out of patience, sails filled the western horizon. Mine. All of mine. The army that had died in the Blackwood War, giants in fresh plate at the rails, turtle knights flanking the transports in the swell, 500 cavalry, 100 mages, thunderbirds stacked above the mastheads like a second weather system, rested, fed, untouched. I hadn't lost one soldier, and I was suddenly the strongest force on that field, by a margin no one needed to measure twice. Barden tried bluster anyway, force of habit. I didn't answer. Shadow answered. My father's hidden blade rose off my deck into open air and unsealed, and the pressure of a level 15 Sky Warrior rolled across the beachhead like a change in planetary weather. Barden was level 14. His colleagues were 13. Every calculation on that shoreline reran itself in one silent second, and I watched 4 pirate commanders arrive simultaneously at the same sum. Then I made them the offer I'd been saving since before any of them landed. The Blackwood family was spent meat. The real wolves, the Storm Pirates, the Cheers family, overlord powers already pushing into our leaderless sea, were the actual tomorrow. A 5-way alliance with me beat a war with me on every line of the spreadsheet, and I'd even let them keep everything they'd already looted. Torvin screamed about loyalty, contracts, honor among allies. The 4 commanders looked at him, looked at Shadow, looked at me, and arrested Torvin on the spot as a goodwill gesture. The Blackwood family, which had begun the year of Viscount House with a fortress island, ended it as a bargaining chip passed hand to hand by its own hired help. Somewhere in Highland, I like to think, Cassian felt a cold draft and couldn't say why. The pirates did want to keep my trapped relatives, noble hostages, prime ransom stock, and Barden had paid 1,000 men for the privilege. I couldn't push there without cracking the brand new alliance. So Darian stepped forward and, in that silk-wrapped ledger voice of his, traded our claim on the Owens double-door holdings, 300 square kilometers we didn't hold and couldn't defend, plus a pledge of mutual defense over the pirates' interests there, for custody of everyone in my castle. Barden walked away convinced he'd fleeced us. Darian let him stay convinced. That is what Darian is for. The Allied army sailed off, the dust settled, and the castle doors opened on reckoning hour. Gideon came out swinging, literally battle-chi lit, roaring about vile bastard schemes, and Shadow kicked him across the courtyard into a wall. He got up, spat blood, and made his little speech anyway. Schemes are powerless before true strength, boy. I agreed with him completely and pointed at Shadow, at which point the logic of his own argument landed on him harder than the kick. Interrogation first. He knew things about the Elder Council I wanted, and then the family's own justice, which, per a quiet clause in Valerius's letter, I was permitted to administer personally. I did. The Elders faction had sent 2,000 men to harvest a bastard. They got back a casualty list and a lesson in agricultural risk. Alden cried, properly cried, snot and hiccups, clutching my sleeve, promising his big brother eternal obedience, offering me, generously, his allowance. I searched myself for hatred and found none in stock. The boy hadn't even been born during my predecessor's worst years, and stupidity inherited is a sentence, not a crime. So I sentenced him to the crueler mercy, honest work. Old Kenji took custody of the young master's re-education. Wall repair by day, latrine detail by night, 2 hours of sleep, the identical curriculum my predecessor had survived at his age, administered by the one man who remembered every detail of it. Within a week, the pride of House Thorn flinched at the sight of a broom. Character building. I'm practically a tutor. Renato, who had been merely wrong rather than vile, and who had argued against the whole scheme from the first day my interrogation of Gideon confirmed it, got the dignity of a clean ransom and a cell with a window. And then there was Malachi. He knelt in my courtyard on both knees and the performance was exquisite. The old retainer, gray and humble, reminding me tearfully how he had protected me from Lady Seraphina's knife all those years ago. Protected. The man who'd held her wrist with one hand and held the door for her with the other, every year of a stolen childhood. When the performance got no applause, he switched scripts. His master was the chief of House Thorn, and if I dared touch him, the Marquis would never let it rest. And that's when the last tumbler of my father's letter clicked into place. Because Valerius had known exactly who steered his wife's schemes. Valerius had watched this man run the Elder's errands for decades and had let him board this expedition anyway, into my jurisdiction, under my justice, with a letter in my pocket authorizing everything. Malachi hadn't been sent here as staff. Malachi was a gift. Butler Malachi, I said, and I made sure he saw my face clearly, because his was the first face this world ever showed me, smiling over my blood on the marble. Trust me, Marquis Valerius will never seek revenge on me. For you. I watched him understand. That was the payment, that half second of understanding, for the boy in the carriage, for the ribs, for the not yet. MacLeod walked him away, and the courtyard was very quiet, and something in the back of my skull that had been grinding since my first 10 minutes in this world, finally, went still. Final tally for Operation Introduce My Enemies: 1 invading coalition converted into an alliance. 1 old Viscount house deleted from the sea. 1 Elder Council expedition annihilated to the last ledger, at a cost to me of 0 soldiers, 1 wrecked curtain wall, and a regional reputation for shamelessness so profound that hardened pirate lords reportedly began double-checking their drinks in my presence. The ransom negotiation had a shopping list behind it. I'd been stuck at the gates of Great Mage for months. Years of potion-fueled growth had left my mental power fast but impure, and Ayla's cold analysis put my breakthrough odds at 1% per attempt. 500 full-force attempts, she estimated, unless I fixed the quality problem. She offered 3 fixes, in ascending order of fantasy. 200,000 gold of tempering potions, a rare mental secret technique, or an advanced meditation technique, the true article, the one that purifies everything and triples the odds, which existed only in the vaults of great houses, priced in things gold doesn't buy. So when the Solomons came to ransom Alden and Renato within the month, my price, delivered through Darien with my compliments, wasn't money. The family's money was insultingly finite. It was knowledge, a fire element advanced meditation technique from the clan vaults. Heavenly Fall fire flow, body tempering, mind purifying, the class of treasure the great houses blockade at the level of civilization itself. Valerius approved the trade personally, same day. My family had finally, after 2 lifetimes, given me something worth having. All it took was defeating them in a war. The after-action reports made a lovely reading circle. In Highland City, Cassian Volkov learned that his coalition had become my alliance, that the Blackwood family he'd sponsored was now a prisoner transfer, and that 2 idiot noble houses, whose fleet his own intelligence had somehow failed to flag because his spies were all busy watching Double Door Island, had absorbed the entire blow he'd spent a year purchasing. Witnesses report table damage. His elders were now asking openly why every avalanche the chief started ended with Corbin standing on top of the snow, waving. He wanted to hire the overlords next, the Caldwell family, the Storm Pirates, and his own council refused him the funds. Hatred is a powerful force. So is a budget committee. In the Shining Fortress, my father received his wife at his study door. Madame Beatrice came in swinging. The bastard had dared lay hands on true-born blood. Valerius must go to the family's old ancestor and have me stripped and flogged and the territory handed to Alden properly this time. Valerius, I treasure the informant's transcript, asked her whether she wished to explain to the old ancestor why 2,000 family troops were feeding fish off an island nobody could find on the study globe. Then he confined her to her chambers, and after she swept out, my father, chief of House Thorn, terror of the Northwest provinces, muttered to his empty study, this is verbatim, that woman's intuition is too terrifying. She'd asked him, you see, point blank, whether he'd secretly helped me win. He'd changed the subject with the grace of a cart losing a wheel. And on a quiet island in the chaotic sea, a woman in a black cloak read the same reports 3 times and ordered her ship provisioned. Victoria arrived at my dock on a shabby, unmarked 3-master, hood up, 3 Earth warriors at her back, Reeves's paranoia, not hers. Half a year since her father drank the red bottle. The confidence I remembered had gone somewhere deep and come back changed, quieter, heavier, aimed. We managed roughly 4 sentences of adult reunion before defaulting to bickering. I complained about the bodyguards. She went silent. I realized mid-sentence I was an idiot. Darian loudly invented a reason to walk everyone else down the pier. And then, with the dock empty, she stopped pretending, and I stopped teasing. And my shirt spent the next while learning exactly how much grief a person can store when she's been strong for 1,000 surviving pirates for 6 months. Everything's in the past, I told the top of her head. From now on, I'm your side of the war. The people who betrayed your father, the people who bought the traitors, the family that sharpened the whole sea against him, they'll all pay their bills. I keep ledgers. Ask anyone. She pushed me away, called me a scoundrel with wet eyes, informed me she'd only come for strategic reasons, and stayed 3 days. The strategic reasons were real, though, because she was still Magnus's daughter. The Blackwood family, chief butchers of her house, currently hiding their halved strength behind the walls of Golden Kui Island, had one exposed artery: trade. 1 million subjects on one island, dependent on convoys for food in and goods out, hundreds of thousands of gold moving monthly through sea lanes they could no longer properly escort. "Help me cut it," she said, over my map table, and her finger on the trade routes was perfectly steady. "Every convoy we take feeds my people and starves theirs, and when they're weak enough, Golden Kui itself." Corbin's territory, official position, neutral. Corbin's hidden pirate fleet, actual position, extremely available. I committed half my army, the entire Loyal Lion Brigade for its war education, 300 Turtle Knights, 60 Thunderbird Riders, 5 Earth Warriors, and shipboard mages, flying colors registered to no port alive. Reeves sent me a letter of thanks so grudgingly polite it read like a hostage note, which from Reeves is practically a hug. The joint venture worked like a mill. Month after month, the Blackwood family's shipping ledgers shortened, while the Black Knight's recovery fund fattened, and old Kenji's office read the panicked Golden Quay correspondence before some of its addressees did. A window into the other side of that mill, since I bought the transcripts later. Golden Quay Island, Blackwood family council chamber. Young Chief Caden demanding of his commander Arthur why the losses kept mounting. Arthur explaining, with the weariness of a man teaching arithmetic to a wall, that half the family's elites were dead at Doubledore, and 3 months of hiring can't rebuild a decade of soldiers. And the chief executive Harrigan finally steering his flailing young master toward the only lever left: blackmail the Volkov family into handling Corbin, since Cassian's schemes had started this bleeding and Cassian's purse could staunch it. Caden reportedly grabbed that idea like a drowning man grabs driftwood, and had to be physically talked out of sailing to Highland personally. My enemies had begun suing each other for warranty coverage. You love to see it. At home, Darian industrialized my future. 3 academies rose on Ice Island that season. The Warrior Academy went up on the northern permafrost, average winter temperature homicidal, because, direct quote, delivered while signing the requisitions, "What do warriors need? Hardship." 1,200 children screened in the first intake, to be distilled by fair competition down to 100 or 2 of focused investment. The Junior Academy taught letters and arithmetic to bright commoner kids bound for the clerk's desks. The Senior Academy trained officers and administrators in 5-year courses, with a magic department bolted on for every talented child my scouts could find, 146 names on the Mage Talent Registry now, each one a future artilleryman of mine, marinating in basic theory. We hired our first alchemists, too. I dreamed of masters. The market sent Flint, Dante, and Jamal, 3 earnest journeymen whose combined success rate could generously be called a coin flip. I toured their new workshop, examined a staff Flint had made at a 30% success rate, which in alchemical economics means working for free, and praised everyone with the warm sincerity of a man screaming inside. "Crooked melons and split dates," I muttered to Darian outside. "Geniuses don't answer job postings from pirate seas," he said. "Plant the orchard you have." Fine. Orchard planted, watered monthly in gold. 2 domestic scenes from that stretch, because empires are mostly made of them. 1. I came home from an inspection round and found MacLeod in the courtyard with his Azure Sea Emperor beast, one of the 3 rescued cubs, now 2 meters of scaled, dragon-blooded menace that had recently thrashed a level 5 turtle leader in a sparring match. I asked what level his beast had reached. He replied with the gravity of a man reporting fleet strength, "Lord, her name is Little Water." McLeod, Garrett, and Ragnar had spent nearly their entire annual salaries on water crystals for those cubs, doubling their growth rate, and all three war-scarred commanders had named their apocalypse lizards like house cats. I authorized a weekly ration of magical beast growth essence from my own lab and fled before anyone could show me a trick. 2. I went looking for Lyra at the herb fields one afternoon, was told she was in the bare winter grove past the mage camp, and set off, then stopped, turned, and found Darian strolling along behind me with his hands clasped like a chaperone. "What are you following me for?" "Did you tell me to leave?" "Use your discernment. Guess what I'm going down there for?" The great administrator of my territory, the sharpest mind on 3 seas, went scarlet to the ears and about-faced with the dignity of a retreating parade. Lyra laughed about it for a week. Some victories don't go in the chronicles. I keep them anyway. Year-end council brought the annual harvest of numbers, and for once they sang, population 100,460. Trade agreements with 46 forces, monthly revenue 133,000 gold and climbing. An army 30% stronger than half a year prior, 9 earth warriors on the rolls, every mage staffed. I paid 5-fold year-end bonuses on the spot, attempted, purely on principle, to classify Darian's bonus as a patriotic donation, and was defeated in open session. He counted it twice, in front of me, making eye contact. We have a beautiful working relationship, and 3 days before the Great Dawn Day Festival, Bishop Katya invited me to co-preside over her Divine Grace ceremony, smiling like a cat with a canary futures contract. I knew it was a trap. Darian's inquiries had confirmed no church rite anywhere required the local lord's attendance. I went anyway, with Shadow at my shoulder, because I was curious what flavor of trap a level 12 priest brews for a man she's hated on principle for a year. The flavor was expensive. She led me down the chapel's back corridor to a private hall whose walls breathed holy light, and my mage's eyes priced the installation mid-stride, a level 15 light element array. Light's protection. 250,000 gold of warding, in a village chapel, in a territory whose entire church budget I personally signed. Arrays like that get installed for marquises. Or against somebody. "It's for you," Katya confirmed sweetly, and the barrier snapped shut between me and Shadow like a portcullis of daylight. Then came the perfume of the actual weapon. Mind magic. Layered charm work. I felt it slide into my skull like warm oil. 3 spells braided together. The kind of forbidden adjacent artistry that turns a man into a puppet of his worst appetites. And around the hall, recording crystals rose glittering into the air, positioned with a director's care. The scheme unfolded in my head with insulting clarity. She couldn't kill a sworn lord of the Terra Crown. She didn't need to. She needed 30 seconds of the notorious lecher Corbin lunging at a bishop of the dawn inside her own church, captured in triplicate, a scandal that would end me from horizon to horizon, no blade required. Teresa's Justice, Senior Sister Edition. One small flaw in the production. My mind has a landlord. Beep. Hostile mental intrusion, 3 signatures. Counterattack? Contain it. And Ayla, record. Everything. So while Katya performed her trembling victim rehearsal at me, eyes wide for the crystals, voice pitched for the tribunal. "Lord Corbin, why are you looking at me like that? What have you done?" I stood in the middle of her masterpiece, politely uncharmed, and let her monologue. She was thorough. She covered Teresa's grudge, her own posting, the scandal script, the church politics that would bury the inquiry. Ayla transcribed every syllable straight off reality, in a format no illusion, no editing, no counterspell could fake, while I supplied the occasional glassy stare to keep the performance going. Then I got bored, dropped the glassy stare, and played it all back to her, her own voice floating in the air between us in crisp blue light, conspiring. I have watched fortresses fall with less devastation than that woman's face. Because a recording of a Dawn bishop entrapping a crown lord with charm magic inside her own church wasn't embarrassment. It was a tribunal summoning, career cremating catastrophe. For her teacher, for Teresa, for everyone whose seal had touched her posting. She went from predator to petitioner in the time it takes light to cross a room. "Name your price," she said, gray as old ice. "Cooperation. My territory's chapel serves my territory, heals my people, blesses my harvests, and retires from politics. No spying, no schemes, no letters to interesting addresses. And the Divine Grace ceremony happens right now, on schedule, with a smile. So the proud Bishop Katya walked directly out of her own failed ambush into a plaza of 10,000 waiting faithful and delivered, by several eyewitness accounts, the shortest sermon in the recorded history of the Church of Dawn, a prayer clipped to its stems, a blessing fired off like a crossbow bolt, and then genuine holy light waterfalling over the crowd while she radiated the serenity of a woman being audited. The faithful noticed nothing but the miracle, old wounds knitting, the sick standing straight, children glowing like lamps. My subjects cheered their Lord and their church as one, a genuinely lovely ceremony. I applauded longest, from the front row, where she could see me. Lyra cornered me in the lab that evening. A great mage's senses read more through a barrier than any warrior's, and interrogated me, not about the danger, about the gossip. When I described Katya's face at the playback, my sweet, dignified, gentle Lyra laughed until she had to sit down on my workbench and knocked over a rack of empty flasks. I keep learning new things about my people, and every single one of them is worse and better than I thought. A month later, with Heavenly Fall Fireflow purging every impurity my potion habit had ever left in my channels, the bottleneck cracked. Great Mage, level 10, at 25 years old. The title mattered less than the unlock behind it, level 10 potions. My first successful brew, Ayla steering through 12 high-grade ingredients like a pilot through reefs, was worth 14,000 gold a bottle against 2,000 in materials. At 3 bottles a day, my personal income now out-earned entire Viscount houses, and Ayla immediately drafted a sales throttling plan so the world wouldn't notice that the impossible had a mailing address. And the world, right on cue, came courting. 6 crowns sent envoys in a single season. Terra, Autran, Storm, Ribera, Cardina, the Silver Lion Duchy, all bidding for one product, my flag. A hereditary landed noble title for the Pirate Sea's newest power, terms negotiable. Ribera and Cardina offered 10 years of tax exemption plus knowledge access. Storm offered 8. My own Terra Kingdom, smug in the certainty that geography did its negotiating. My trade, my smuggling routes, my safe harbor plans all lived under Terra's shadow, offered 3 years and a shrug. I complained for 2 days on principle, then signed with Terra anyway, because spite is not a foreign policy. Their envoy, Callum Reese, an honorary viscount with kind manners and a father who happened to be Governor Preston of the North Sea Fleet, a connection I filed under Cultivate immediately, sweetened it with a private salt license. 50,000 a year in permitted sales, taxed at 70%. The Crown's generosity could fit in a thimble with room left for the thumb. I smiled, signed, and started planning how to acquire the governor's friendship retail since wholesale wasn't on offer. One condition, I told Callum. The ceremony happens here. I don't travel to capitals full of Orocos and Solomons with good memories and better assassins. Already arranged, he said. Sensible man. I liked him. I was also, even then, pricing what it would cost to buy his father, but you can like a man and budget for his family. That's just diversification. The ceremony was held at Chiming Fortress on a freezing, diamond-bright morning. The etiquette officials had spent 7 days trying to install the full royal protocol on me. I tried on over 100 outfits and killed 2/3 of the program by executive tantrum, but what survived was enough. I rode the circuit of my own walls in white velvet and sable, a silver circlet in my hair, through 10,000 kneeling subjects whose cheering shook frost off the battlements. Freed workers who owned their own roofs now, ransomed families whose children were in my academies, soldiers whose pensions were legend on 3 seas. Whatever they saw riding past, it apparently deserved the noise, and my face ached from lordly smiling within a mile. At the platform before the keep, Callum waited with a replica of the Sword of Kings. I knelt in front of everyone I'd built, and everyone I'd bought, and everyone I'd freed. 6 years. From a carriage, from a knife at my throat, from the family isn't a charity, to this. By the king's decree, Knight Corbin, a heaven-sent talent, has expanded the kingdom's territory in the Blue Wave Sea. Therefore, Corbin is hereby granted the title of Viscount to be passed down through generations, never to be diminished. The blade touched my shoulder, cold through the velvet, and the bastard of House Thorn stood up, a landed hereditary noble of the Kingdom of Terra, a title not granted by a father's mercy or a family registry, but carved out of an empty ocean with potions, giants, audacity, and the best friend a bastard ever conned into a partnership. Then I spent the altitude immediately, because rank you don't share is just loneliness with paperwork. 9 of my people were called to kneel, and 9 honorary knighthoods came down on 9 sets of shoulders. MacLeod, who had bet his whole company on a boy with a basement. Gareth, once a caravan steward, now trembling so hard he could barely stand for the accolade. Kaelin, Silas, Julian, Ragnar, Rorik. Old Kenji, who had fed a hated child when it earned him nothing, knighted in front of 10,000 witnesses. And Lyra, who had once been priced by the pound in a Highland auction hall, and who rose from the platform as a knight in the territory where every soul owed her shield spells their skin. That night, the whole island burned gold with festival fires. I stood on the wall with Darian, who claimed his eyes were watering from the cold, and I wore my new Viscount's medal so relentlessly over the following days that he formally petitioned, in writing, through his own department, to have it welded to my forehead. Petition denied. Medal stayed on. The neighbors adjusted fast. The Falcon, Khan, and Cram families, the same 3 baron houses that had once pooled armies to erase me, sent gift-laden envoys begging alliance, terrified of the pirate fleet operating out of my shadow. I quoted them half their family fortunes as the entry fee and watched the envoys' faces cross several climate zones. Some ledgers stay open on purpose. Ask my sister if you can find where the family's hidden her prospects. And exactly 20 days into my nobility, the sea itself declared war. The courier's voice was still shaking when he delivered it. Nalora, holy domain priestess of the sea demons, had led 3,000 mages in casting a 19th level forbidden spell. The earth-shaking roaring waves and a tsunami 100 miles wide had simply erased dozens of human forces off the Lapis Lazuli coast in a single morning. Behind the wave, 200,000 sea demon troops in 3 armies, out of the deep water for the first time in generations, driving into the human sea areas with one strategic destination that any map could read: the Orc Empire. A link-up that would crack the whole board. And every route from their front lines to the Orc border ran through the northwest of the Blue Wave Sea. Through me. I'd spent 6 years turning a worthless border rock into the strongest position in the region, and the region had just become the front line of a racial war. The universe keeps a sense of humor. Nobody said it was kind. The reports rolled in like the tide itself. The Caldwell family and the Storm Pirates, the 2 top human powers, held their fortress seas by the skin of their saints, 60,000 defenders each, and even they were only enduring, not winning. Everywhere else, the demons' method was elegant and horrible. Their priestesses carried dragon-boned horns that yoked tens of thousands of sea beasts into weapons, and they spent beasts instead of blood. Wave after wave of fangs and tonnage crashing over walls until the ammunition ran out. Not one sea demon on a ladder, 4 large forces in our sea annihilated, then 8 medium ones. Then the counting stopped being news. The human alliance, tied down by orcs and elves massing at every border, sent regrets and a military merit exchange list. Wonderful. We were on our own with a coupon catalog. I did what I do. Combat readiness across the territory, outer strongholds drawn in, walls fed with everything my new income could buy. My first level 10 potions went to my Earth warriors on a war schedule, and one invitation went south to a certain fugitive armada. Come north, bring everyone. Victoria and Reeves brought the whole Black Knight remnant to Ice Island. Under 1,000 souls now, but what souls? Nearly every survivor a professional. 10 Earth warriors. The Storm Eagle Knights, and a mage corps with a great mage at its head. And Reeves himself, whose arrival featured a silent hour-long alpha standoff with Shadow that neither Sky Warrior won and both visibly enjoyed. They've since developed a relationship built entirely on glaring. It seems to nourish them. At the War Council, I tried, with suspicious generosity, to assist the Black Knights to the rear lines. A man likes to inherit his in-law's army intact. Don't judge me. Reeves saw through it in one breath and stood up with a line that shut the entire room. Our Black Knight pirate group can die on the battlefield. It cannot retreat. It was so in the past. It is so today. Fine. Frontline it is. Some people insist on being magnificent, and you can only get out of their way and budget for the funerals you hope to cancel. Barden wrote from Double Door Island, invoking our alliance, begging reinforcements for Black Fortress. I read his letter aloud to Victoria, the man who'd betrayed her father's colors, pleading for rescue from behind her father's stolen walls, and we agreed on a reply consisting of no reply. Some invoices you settle by silence. Victoria wanted the opposite of silence, a preemptive joint strike, our fleets plus the pirates, catching the demon vanguard between hammers. Bold as her blood. I talked her down with the argument I'd been assembling for weeks. The sea demons number barely 1,000,000 souls total. They cannot afford attrition. Watch them. They spend summoned beasts like arrows and hoard their own people like sky warriors. They probe, they bypass, they bully the cheap targets. Their real war is with the North Sea Fleet for the corridor to the orcs. Show them a fortress that will cost actual sea demon lives, and they'll route around it and leave a screen, because every soldier they lose here is one they can't spend there. And if you're wrong, she said. If I'm wrong, we run for Beast Slaughter Island, and I spend my shiny new title on Sanctuary. But I'm not wrong. Care to bet? If I win, you owe me one condition, my choice. Her eyes narrowed. And if I win? Then we're running for our lives, and you can bill me on the way. I'll take that bet, she said, because she always takes the bet. It's one of the several hundred reasons the wedding is this year. I'll give you one scene from the other side, reconstructed later from a captured officer's account, because it's the scene that proves the bet. On the flagship of the Vanguard fleet, a young sea demon priestess in training asked her aunt, the commander, Clara, why they didn't simply smash through the North Sea Fleet and join hands with the orcs at once, since the humans were scattering like fish. And Clara, patting the girl's head, explained the whole war in 3 sentences. Use the orcs. Never admit the orcs. Because an orc empire invited into the Sea of Myriad Islands doesn't leave when the war ends, and a people of 1,000,000 does not survive trading a human landlord for an orc one. Every beast wave, every bypassed fortress, every unspent sea demon soldier was that arithmetic in motion. An enemy who thinks in ledgers. Finally, someone I could negotiate with, over a wall, at a price. Out on the water, the enemy was already proving my case. Their Vanguard priestess, Clara, blue-haired, patient, dangerous, one of those commanders you learned to respect from casualty reports, reached Double Door Island and began feeding beast waves into Black Fortress, exactly as forecast. Probe, bleed, withdraw, return with a fresh horde. No sea demon touched a ladder. By the second visit, my brave allies had burned through 1,000,000 gold of shells and scrolls and 7,000 men. Bardon's victory banquet had aged into a war council with rationing, and the Horn was still calling more monsters up from the deep. The fortress my father-in-law built, defended by the men who helped bury him, grinding down under an endless tide, while the tide's masters looked past it along the Northwest Passage at the little island kingdom sitting square on their road to the orcs. At my walls. At my 100,000 people. At 6 years of everything. So here's where I stand tonight. On the ramparts of Qiming Fortress, Viscount's medal cold on my chest, watching the horizon for blue sails. Behind me, giants are arguing about dinner rations and losing to Garok's arithmetic. Turtle knights drill in the Black Bay. A bishop who owes me is, for once, praying in my favor. Ayla is running siege calculations and filing them under manageable, probably. Darian is 3 candles deep in the war budget, muttering my name as a curse and a comfort in the same breath. And my fiancée is sharpening her sword beside an uncle who still hasn't decided whether to bless me or bury me in a fortress her father's enemies once thought they'd taken from me. 6 years ago, this world introduced itself with a knife at my throat and a butler saying, "Not yet." Now an empire of sea demons is doing the arithmetic on my walls, deciding whether the fastest road to their victory is worth what I'll charge them for the toll. They have 200,000 soldiers, 3 holy domain priestesses, and a horn that commands the deep. I have a chip, a fortune, a family I built out of freed people and sworn blades, and a perfect record on this island that 5 armies have personally audited. I've already placed my bet. Ask the sea how my bets usually land.